they will fail. Securing the identity of the African citizen is no longer merely an administrative task or a technical challenge. It is the ultimate act of digital sovereignty. It is how we ensure that Africa's digital future is owned, managed, and protected by Africans and their trusted partners also around the world. Let us build an Africa where our identity systems are not just facts and functional, but also impenetrable, resilient, and trusted for generations to come. I thank you, and also just a quick information to let you know that I have two publications. One is a commandment, the second is Republic. All of them are in French, and they're available in Ivory Coast. Le Script and also Librairie de France. If anyone want to read to understand the perspective, especially for the French speakers, they are available. I thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.
Uh, Thank you very much for the thought you've shared with us. At this moment, we are running a bit behind schedule, so we will take some few questions, about two questions. If someone has a question for any of the speakers, please raise your hand and we will get you a microphone. You ask the question and you tell us who you're addressing the question to. So if there is any question to any of the speakers. Okay, I think your point there. Oh, okay. There's a.
Bonjour. On entend? Bonjour. J'aimerais poser ma question à Monsieur Ouattara, le directeur de ANSI. Alors, quelles sont les infrastructures futures que vous prévoyez de mettre en place pour la sécurité identitaire de la Côte d'Ivoire?
Situé en place. Non, en fait, notre rôle en tant que ANSI, c'est justement de créer le cadre pour que ces infrastructures se mettent en place. Créer le cadre contraignant pour que ces infrastructures se mettent en place. L'identité étant une infrastructure critique, nous avons une loi sur un décret sur la protection des infrastructures critiques. Et notre rôle, c'est de veiller à ce que les agences comme l'ONESI soient complètement alignés sur ce cadre. Et ces textes font des exigences strictes, notamment en termes de disponibilité, en termes d'obligations audit, en termes de, par exemple, ils ont obligation de se faire surveiller par un SOC, soit en interne, soit un SOC où ils vont louer des services. Mais notre rôle, ce n'est pas de déployer ces infrastructures pour les autres entités, c'est de les pousser justement à les mettre en place. Ensuite, nous veillons à ce que, en cas d'incident, nous soyons un renfort pour eux. S'ils n'ont aucune compétence, nous viendrons en renfort. S'ils ont des compétences internes, nous coordonnons avec eux et nous regardons les parties prenantes. Voilà le rôle d'une agence comme les nôtres. Donc, pousser justement ces organisations et ces gestionnaires d'infrastructures critiques à être conformes aux normes, à prendre les services de prestataires privés ou eux-mêmes les développer en interne qui soient aux normes. Voilà comment je peux répondre à cette question. C'est bon?
Bonjour à tous. J'ai une question pour nos deux brillants intervenants. Je voudrais savoir pourquoi est-ce que l'Afrique a du mal à voter des lois, ou bien pourquoi est-ce que les décideurs ont du mal à accompagner des agences comme ANSI qui font l'effort de donner une identité africaine. Est-ce que c'est une méconnaissance des dangers de la cybersécurité, ou est-ce que c'est carrément euh, une volonté manifeste de ne vraiment pas sécuriser toute notre Afrique qui nous coûte cher? Merci.
Je peux parler pour la Côte d'Ivoire. Je pense que nos gouvernements n'ont pas de problème à prendre des lois, hein. Les lois qui régissent aujourd'hui la sécurité des systèmes d'information en Côte d'Ivoire ont commencé à être mises en place aux environs des années 2013, et même des réponses institutionnelles ont commencé à être données à partir des années 2007 à 2009, hein. Donc notre CERT, par exemple, il date de 2007. La DITT que vous connaissez date de 2009. Et ensuite, en 2013, on a eu les lois sur la cybercriminalité, les lois sur la protection des données à caractère personnel, les lois sur les transactions électroniques. Justement, on parle de PKI 10 ans après, mais ces lois-là datent de 2013. Et puis, en 2021, il y a eu encore une batterie de lois sur la protection des infrastructures critiques, sur le plan de protection sur la politique de sécurité des systèmes d'information de l'administration, les procédures d'audit. Tout cela a déjà été établi. Le vrai enjeu, c'est l'application de ces lois. Donc, pour la Côte d'Ivoire, on a eu un décalage de temps parce que l'agence qui devait mettre en œuvre ces lois, on a pris beaucoup de temps de réflexion. Donc, il n'y a pas de problème pour voter les lois et tout se met en place. Autre chose que je souhaite vous faire remarquer, c'est qu'on est dans un monde qui est très évolutif. Hein. Il y a toujours de nouvelles notions, toujours de nouvelles notions. Donc, on a un choix, ou alors on observe avant de légiférer, ou alors on légifère vite au risque de se tromper. Je pense que la meilleure approche, c'est d'observer et réagir par des textes pour encadrer les dérives après. Hein. On ne peut pas, surtout dans ce contexte-là, il est difficile de présager de dérives futures. Donc, l'environnement même se prête à cela. On légifère en Côte d'Ivoire, on a pris le taureau par le corne depuis longtemps et on continue de légiférer. Et vous verrez même dans les mois ou dans les prochains semestres de nouveaux textes qui mettent à jour les textes de 2021. Donc, ne désespérez pas, nos gouvernants font leur boulot.
Sure, thank you. Well, I think I would look at it from the African context. 15 years of work, my experience both in the private and public sector, there are certain factors I can deduce arising from the state of affairs. I think it started with lack of legislation, but we have improved. As I've mentioned, currently we are above 80% on the continent. So I think that is settled. The key question has been the implementation, investment, enforcement. But there are scientific factors that's underpins why Africa seems to be lagging behind in terms of either implementing the law or passing the law. One of them is the digital development indicators. I remember very well when I came in 15 years ago when I set up my practice. Really, I think the typical issues, the development, the digital development were not as we are witnessing. In fact, digital transformation wasn't at the center as it is now. And that had slowed, national response. But there were also what I call the tangibility of impact. They didn't feel it. The stakeholders are interacting with law enforcement, government ministers, private sector holders, actors. They didn't see that the cyber issues were tangible, right? And most importantly, and permit me to mention this, the earlier forms of the cyber crimes were attacks that were targeting Westerners, right? The romance fraud, the scams. So I think within the jurisdiction around the continent, response were quite slow. And I remember very well in 2013, one of the acts at the time in Ghana that moved government ministers into action was an attack that led to about 2 million euros, gone lost. I was in the private sector, but I led investigations supporting the state. And that brought, a lot of focus attention. It was the first time that also the government made contact with the Budapest Convention, Council of Europe, because in the investigations, IP address evidence were scattered across multiple jurisdictions. And the question is, how do you actually investigate this kind of case without collaboration? So once the attacks are becoming more tangible, they are hitting our critical information infrastructures. I think government ministers, actors are improving their response. Of course, there are other factors, but it does take time. Let's support that change with some sort of awareness and some sort of advocacy both within government, civil society, but also from the private sector. Thank you.
Okay, so this brings us to the end of this session. I would like to thank our speakers, and I think they deserve a round of applause. Let's give them a, please, we take some pictures very quickly, and then, and as they are taking the pictures, I think that I will introduce the next session. For the next session, we are going to look at how African nations can harmonize cybersecurity legal frameworks with international standards. How African nations can harmonize. Yeah. The photographer. Where's Where's the photographer? Okay, let's do individual photography. All right. Okay. Thank you very much. All right. Thank you. A round of applause for our speakers. So we're going to deal with how African countries can harmonize cybersecurity legal frameworks with international standards. And then to lead, it's a panel discussion. To lead this panel, I will invite the Principal Officer, Cybersecurity Resilience Communication Authority of Kenya. That is in the person of Francis Satiti. Please, Francis, if you are here. I made your surname right. That's okay. Forgive me. Thank you very much.
I'll see you behind the tent. I hope you can hear me. Okay, good morning, everyone. Bonjour à tous. I think I would go right to inviting my panel this morning, starting with Mr. Mark Andre Loco. Welcome to the stage. A round of applause for him. He's the Director General, Information Systems and Digital Agency in Benin. Next is Madam Tigist Hamid, Director General, Information Network Security Agency of Ethiopia. Mr. Taylor Reynolds, Global Practice Manager, Policy and Regulation, Digital and AI Vice Presidency at the World Bank. Welcome. Mr. Prosper Ntetika, who is the President, Think Tank Law and Technologies, DR Congo. And finally, last but not least, Mr. Dr. Nizar Ben Neji, I think I saw him, ICT expert and strategist, and former Minister of Communications Technologies, 2021 to 2024 in Tunisia. Yeah, welcome. So I will take my seat. So once again, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Mesdames et messieurs, bonjour. It's with great pleasure to be here with you this morning in this beautiful city of Abidjan. As I mentioned, my name is Francis Itati from Communications Authority of Kenya. This is the regulator for the ICT sector in Kenya with the responsibilities in telecommunications, e-commerce, cybersecurity, broadcasting, and postal and courier licensing. My role in the cybersecurity department is that we run the Kenya Computer Incident Response Team Coordination Center, which is a multi-agency framework for coordinating response to cybersecurity matters, and also serves as the Cybersecurity Operations Center for the ICT and telecommunications sector. With regard to Kenya's public key infrastructure, the Communications Authority runs the Route Certification Authority for Kenya. And what we do is that we license and regulate providers of digital certification services. We also have the ICT Authority that plays the role of the government certification service provider and other entities that are privately licensed to issue digital certification services. So with regard to the national public infrastructure, it has been instrumental towards rolling out of digital certification services across government, and we have licensed various entities towards this objective. So for this session today, as you heard earlier, it is titled How African Nations Can Harmonize Cybersecurity Legal Frameworks with International Standards. So in terms of the ICT sector in Kenya, we have noticed remarkable growth, especially with the liberalization of the industry that has laid the foundation for the country's digital revolution. According to the latest sector statistics, as of December 31st, 2025, mobile SIM subscriptions were recorded at 78.4 million, translating to a penetration rate of 149.5%. This is against a population of just under 60 million. The mobile market continues to grow remarkably, translating to a penetration rate of 98%. By December of 2025, total mobile phones connected to mobile networks was 78.3 million, translating to a penetration rate of 149.4%. So going back to Kenya's national public key infrastructure, which is a fundamental component of the country's digital transformation agenda that has enabled secure electronic transactions, trusted digital identities, and legally recognized electronic signatures. The NPKI was established under a robust policy, legal, and regulatory framework and provides a trust architecture that is necessary for secure digital communication between government, businesses, and most importantly, the citizens. As Kenya implements its digital transformation strategy, the NPKI is increasingly central to enabling issues of interoperability, cybersecurity resilience, and trusted digital ecosystems. From a policy perspective, Kenya's national public infrastructure represents both an opportunity and investment in cyber trust services, capacity building, and collaboration between government, regulators, financial institutions, and the private sector to support a secure and inclusive digital economy. With regard to the objectives of this session, we'll be looking at 5 major things: to examine the policy and legal frameworks required to secure identity systems, as with regard to critical information infrastructure, also exploring approaches for aligning national cybersecurity laws with African and international cybersecurity standards, played a critical role in strengthening the country's cybersecurity posture, as you mentioned earlier. So, considering this and having achieved quite significant success nationally, but looking at the region, my question is, how can governments ensure interoperability? And this ties in quite, there's an overlap, it ties in closely with the question I asked before. So how can governments ensure interoperability across e-government services within the region? Perhaps looking at the East African region. I know West Africa, the scenario might be a bit different. So within the context of the East Africa, what would be your thoughts on this?
Thank you, Francis. I'd love to mention about Ethiopia's situation first on the cybersecurity era for national identity, and then I'll come to the interoperability of the region. So in order to give insight, as I mentioned earlier, INSA as a national cybersecurity agency is established back 19 years. So we start talking about cybersecurity ahead of the technology. So we used to have the central PKI, the National Root Certificate Authority. If some of you remember last year when you have been in Addis Ababa for ID for Africa, we have been inaugurating PKI, but not started for national ID purpose. But this year we managed to have a PKI, digital certificate for national ID, for electronic passport, and for e-tax and electronic invoice system. This gives an insight that an agency like INSA should focus on national ID as a base and foundation for interoperability of e-government services. So we have our own MESO platform, which is MESO means a plate that share food in traditional way. So we bring all the government services in one plate, in one-stop service. So we used to have a security as a foundation level for that, and we used to deliver services based on national ID. So luckily, we have been incrementing the enrollment to 43 million this year. It's a good achievement that is led by the Digital Transformation Council by the Deputy Prime Minister. So national ID is a route for interoperability of the e-government service. So in order to have that, the first thing, we don't have to stop thinking in a siloed approach. So all government entities, if they think at the back office in a siloed approach, we are not going to deliver e-government service centrally. So if we surpass that, we can still think about the regional integration. As you mentioned earlier, the East Africa, of course, all the AU initiative of Agenda 2063, as well as the African Free Trade Continental Trade Agreement, since we're the signatory of a member. So, and of course, IGAD as well. So we used to have an agreement on that to have a free trade across the continent. So in order to have that, we have to have a standard working principle in order to get a free integration of interoperability of systems. For that, the first thing that I would like to mention is there should be an interoperability standard that the African continent should work. That's one of them is open standard. For instance, if you have seen the identity service, most of the African countries use the open source standards, and we leverage that with with our own local language and requirement. So we need to have open standard framework for that. It's mandatory in order to be regionally interconnected. The other thing is thinking multi-stakeholder engagement. For instance, if you have seen national ID program of most of the African countries, we have to have a partnership with global financiers like World Bank. We have to integrate with private companies for enrollment and other services. So we have to have a private and a citizen engagement for interoperability in the region as well. So we have open standard, we have interoperability, and then the main thing that we have to consider is making the citizen under the discussion point of the integration of the points. So since the threats are emerging, as my colleagues from Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire mentioned earlier, we should have to be alerted and proactive. In order to have interoperability, we have to focus on security as well, since we are making it open and interoperable, but we need to have a common framework and agreement for data sharing, data governance, and risk identification, since the risk is different from country to country. So we need to have a common goal. As earlier my colleague was mentioning that we need to have a Malabo Convention as well as UN conventions as well. So the standards and the guidelines should be mandatory to have interoperability, since we all have here for national ID, identity is mandatory. Citizens should be focused in the need to know base communication.
Okay, thank you very much, Madam Tigis. I think just to recap, issues of multi-stakeholderism, including all stakeholders, issues of standards, having an open standard has been instrumental, and I think for me the key takeaway would be that the services are tied to the national ID. I think very critical for the success of a national ID system. So thank you very much. My next panelist is, I think I would pose a question to Mr. Taylor Reynolds, who's a global practice manager at the World Bank, as you mentioned earlier. So the World Bank has played a critical role in supporting countries to build inclusive, trusted, and secure digital identity systems that enhance public sector delivery, including financial inclusion and digital participation. So in your role, when you look at the African continent and what the African nations can do, as African nations update their cybercrime and electronic evidence laws to align with the international treaties, we've talked about the Budapest Convention. How can they ensure that these new enforcement powers do not infringe on fundamental human rights and also issues of data privacy?
Thank you very much. I can hear myself now. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. Can I start by saying I really like food? And this is my first time in Côte d'Ivoire, and I've spent 4 days trying to find fufu and futu. And it turns out that in the evenings, this food is too heavy, and so people don't sell it in restaurants for dinner. And I've been going around trying to find this food. So I'm excited. I'm going to try and get some later today because all of my Ivoirian friends have said you have to try the fufu and the futu. So the reason I bring up food, and now the mezzo plate, I think I've had before. So, so I really like this food idea. When we look at foods in different countries, I love to come to countries and try their food, and it's different in every place that I go. But it has the same important elements. It has carbohydrates, it's got fats, it has protein, it has calcium, it has sodium. There's a certain number of core ingredients that all of our food needs to have, but then we benefit from mixing it together in different ways that work for our culture and for our tastes. In many ways, I feel like cybersecurity legislation and agreements across countries need to work in the same way. What we need to focus on is not that everyone has identically the same type of food or the same type of cybersecurity legislation. So in some ways, it doesn't matter which international agreement, whether it's Budapest or whether it's Hanoi, that we're covering. What's more important is that we're getting those fundamental components correct. So just quickly, the list of my ingredients that I think our cybersecurity food should have are, first of all, precise definitions. Make sure that we know what we're talking about and we're very precise and don't keep our definitions broad. If we don't want unauthorized access or denial of service attacks, we need to make those very explicit in the laws. The second is there's a fundamental component about protecting our people and protecting our citizens. So This requires some sort of protection, some judicial oversight, some warrants, some scoping and intent. Make sure that the scoping of these things are done in the correct way. But protecting our people remains one of the core elements, one of our core fundamental components. We need to define and protect our critical infrastructure, define those in the cybersecurity legislation, say, here's what it is, and here are the requirements. We do need to have some way to do cross-border sharing of information. You know, for the MLATs, how do we make sure that this functions well? I come from a university most recently, so we do need to have some sort of ingredient that talks about a safe harbor for researchers. We need some way to be able to test these systems, to do research to make sure that we are actually secured. And we don't want to be putting researchers in jail or getting them in trouble for actually trying to defend us better. One theme that's come across throughout the meetings today is another core ingredient, and that is we need to have funding and institutional support that is built in at the onset. Like, this is critical. These are critical functions, and we need that either in legislation or in some sort of regulation that says, here is how we're going to security. We do a policy for a DPI. So actually getting these things harmonized across the different groups is going to be critical as well. So if you're building your food, your plate, I think those are the things that need to be on it, and I will report back on the fufu if I'm successful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Reynolds. You have taken me back many years to my biology class when I was learning about a balanced diet. So really, I think for the key takeaway is that we really have to balance our cybersecurity and digital ID diet so that with all these elements, we can achieve what we really need to. So thank you for that submission. I'll move on to Mr. Prosper Ntetika, who is the president of the think tank Law and Technologies, DR Congo. So as the president of this organization, you have been actively engaged in advancing discussions at the intersection of the law, the technology, and digital governance. So, and your work has been key in shaping policy conversations around issues of digital trust and inclusive digital identity systems. So with this background and through your research, I'm sure you're doing a lot in you mentioned that your PhD candidate, advocacy and stakeholder engagement activities. How can cybercrime laws be harmonized, again, to address cross-border offenses? We're talking about mutual legal assistance, transnational nature of cybercrime. So from a digital ID standpoint, how do you think these laws can be harmonized to achieve this?
Merci beaucoup. Cette question est très importante parce que elle touche directement à tout ce qui a été dit un peu depuis le début. En réalité, on l'a aussi dit tout à l'heure, c'est une question de cadre. Il faut qu'il y ait des cadres qui puissent interagir à travers différents pays. Si je veux revenir sur l'exemple de mon collègue de la Banque mondiale, chaque pays peut avoir sa recette, mais il faut que l'on retrouve une espèce d'harmonie dans différents pays. Mais lorsqu'on interroge le cas de notre continent, donc le cas africain, on se rend bien compte qu'il y a eu deux mouvements un peu inversés. Parce que le premier élément fondamental pour lutter contre la cybercriminalité transfrontalière, il faut qu'il y ait des textes. Pourquoi un texte? Parce que c'est dans la loi que l'on établit qu'un comportement est infractionnel. Si cet élément-là n'existe pas, et donc il n'y a pas d'infraction. Donc ce qui veut dire que s'il n'y a pas des standards communs entre les différents pays, un fait infractionnel dans le cyberespace peut l'être dans un pays, mais pas dans un autre. C'est pourquoi la meilleure approche en termes de loi, c'est de converger vers des instruments régionaux. Nous avons la Convention de Malabo de 2014, mais au-delà des textes, c'est aussi d'assurer que les États qui ratifient, qui s'engagent dans des instruments internationaux arrivent à harmoniser leur législation nationale. Le deuxième point, c'est le cadre de gouvernance, parce que autant qu'il faut qu'il y ait des textes auxquels adhèrent les pays, mais il faut que ces pays mettent en place des mécanismes internes pour instituer des organes qui vont appliquer ces textes. Alors, le diagnostic africain est révélateur parce que la Convention de Malabo est de 2014, mais la clause d'applicabilité qui est renseignée en son article 36 indiquait que la Convention devait être entrée en vigueur à la 15e ratification. Et donc, dès 2014, c'est seulement très tard, en 2024, que la Mauritanie a été le 25e État à ratifier cette convention. Et nous sommes allés, la RDC est allée au bout de cette démarche parce que elle avait été commencée en 2023 quand on a fait notre code du numérique. Et c'est sous l'égide de son Excellence, Monsieur le ministre de l'économie numérique, ici présent, qu'en 2025, nous avons formellement ratifié la Convention de Malabo. Donc, ceci veut dire que il faut que ce qui est infraction dans un pays, dans le cyberespace, le soit aussi dans un pays, dans un autre pays, pour qu'il y ait la coopération. Le deuxième temps, au niveau de la gouvernance, ce sont les organes. Après, la réalité institutionnelle dépend de chaque pays à un autre, mais les principes qui sont posés, c'est que autant qu'il faut qu'il y ait des règles qui condamnent les faits infractionnels, mais il faut aussi en même temps avoir des organes spécialisés qui vont mettre en œuvre l'application de ces textes, c'est-à-dire des organes qui sont chargés de la répression, qui vont soit appuyer les organes de répression qui existent, comme les parquets, ou qui vont instituer des mécanismes entre les États pour coopérer en matière judiciaire lorsque les infractions concernent plusieurs pays. Ce qui est très consubstantiel à l'aspect du numérique parce que nous sommes dans un espace où les informations sont transfrontalières et ce qui veut impliquer aussi que les cybercriminels peuvent se retrouver dans un pays comme dans un autre. C'est le cas pour la RDC qui, dans son code du numérique, a prévu la mise en place des l'ANSSI, l'Agence nationale de cybersécurité, qui, en son sein, doit avoir un pool judiciaire qui sera dédié à renforcer les organes répressifs, en l'occurrence les parquets, dans la recherche des preuves dans le cyberespace. Donc, ce sont ces standards qui ne sont pas des standards forcément techniques, mais d'abord des standards législatifs qui doivent être mis en place dans l'ordre de la répression des activités de cybercriminalité à travers le continent. Voilà ce que je peux dire à ce propos.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Prosper Tetika. I think the issue of no offense in the law has been it's been quite a major issue across the continent, where you find that the laws have been moving slower than the technology. And also, I think another element is where our judicial officers might not have the competence sometimes to make judgment on some of the technological issues. So I've seen quite a bit of effort being made to upskill the judicial officers so that they can understand some of the technical issues to guide them as they go ahead, as they go along in the judicial process. So I think those are some very key inputs that you made. So I'll move to Dr. Nizar Beneji, a former minister, ICT expert and strategist from Tunisia. So looking at Tunisia, the ministry has spearheaded the launch of the National Digital Identity System, which enabled citizens to securely access digital government services and also using electronic signatures and authenticate online transactions. Also, the ministry supported the development of integrated digital public service platforms, digital citizen mailboxes, e-payment services, and interoperability government systems. And this has been quite successful in advancing the digital transformation. So considering this, and in your role as a former minister and an ICT expert, when you observe that governments are actually moving their services online without relying on electronic proofs such as digital signatures, timestamps, or other trust services, what are some of the risks that you're seeing in of this approach in terms of security, integrity, traceability, and legal trust?
Merci tout d'abord pour la question. Tout d'abord, lorsqu'on fait, d'une manière générale, lorsqu'on se lance dans la transformation digitale et lorsqu'on parle de la cybersécurité, il faut toujours être fidèle à la sécurité. Lorsqu'on, par exemple, le citoyen se présente au niveau d'un guichet pour avoir un service, ou bien se présente au niveau d'une banque pour avoir un service, il va présenter sa carte d'identité. Donc, il va signer sur un chèque volant. Souvent, ce chèque volant, c'est une copie carbone. Voilà, la banque, elle garde une copie, lui, il garde une copie. L'agent qui va le servir, il va signer. On va tamponner sur le papier. Puis, il va quitter l'agence, le citoyen, il va quitter, le client, il va quitter, avec toutes les preuves nécessaires. La copie carbone, c'est la preuve d'intégrité. Sa signature et la signature de l'agent, c'est une preuve de non-répudiation. Non-répudiation de l'acte fait au niveau du guichet. Le cachet et le temps, ça, c'est la preuve de l'agence depuis laquelle il s'est servi. C'est la preuve de temps de la transaction. Maintenant, lorsqu'on part en ligne, lorsqu'on va transformer les procédures en ligne, on doit transformer tous les éléments. Il ne faut pas remplacer tout ça avec juste un login password. Il ne faut pas remplacer tout ça avec juste un OTP pour confirmer l'identité ou bien pour confirmer la transaction. Lorsqu'on part en ligne, il faut transformer tous les éléments de preuve. Commençons par quoi? Par l'identité. Donc, il faut avoir tout d'abord une identité numérique. Et identité numérique officielle. Officielle reconnue par l'État. Reconnue par l'État, ça veut dire quoi? Ça veut dire que cette identité, elle est reconnue par les textes. Elle est délivrée soit par l'État lui-même, ou bien par une entité accréditée par l'État. On appelle ça une identité numérique. Actuellement, dans les pays là où il n'y a pas d'identité numérique électronique, ces pays utilisent généralement les services de EKYC, qui ne sont pas considérés comme une identité numérique officielle. On se sert de ça pour s'assurer de l'identité du client, mais au niveau des textes, cette manière de vérification, elle n'est pas considérée comme une identité numérique officielle. Donc, on a besoin tout d'abord d'une identité numérique officielle pour identifier les clients, pour identifier le citoyen à distance. Dans la pratique actuellement, il y a deux modèles possibles dans le monde. Si on voit le benchmark, il y a deux modèles possibles. Il y a l'identité numérique centralisée. Centralisée, ça veut dire que l'État, ou bien une entité étatique, c'est elle qui délivre l'identité numérique et on a un registre centralisé de toutes les identités numériques. Et généralement, cette identité numérique, elle est liée à l'identifiant unique du citoyen. Elle est liée aux attributs de ce citoyen. Ça veut dire que dans ce modèle, l'État, il concentre plusieurs rôles. L'État, il est l'ID provider, l'État, il est l'attribute provider, il est le wallet provider, l'État, il est l'SSO provider. Ça, on a ce modèle-là dans pas mal de pays. En pays de Golfe, Singapour, et dans pas mal de pays aussi européens, et dans pas mal de pays africains, on a un modèle centralisé d'identification numérique. Voilà. Il y a un autre modèle, l'identité numérique fédérée, ou bien l'identité numérique décentralisée. Donc, c'est possible de trouver dans certains cas, dans pas mal de pays, un système d'accréditation. L'État, il donne un agrément, une accréditation pour des fournisseurs pour délivrer des identités numériques reconnues par les textes. C'est des identités reconnues par les textes. Si on voit les pays du monde, il y a trois modèles possibles. Il y a des pays là où il y a uniquement l'identité numérique centralisée. Il y a des pays comme l'UK, il y a une identité numérique uniquement décentralisée. Il y a des pays là où il y a les deux. Voilà. Maintenant, de point de vue sécurité, il vaut mieux avoir les deux. Il vaut mieux avoir une identité numérique centralisée officielle délivrée par l'État et c'est recommandé d'ouvrir le marché pour le privé, pour avoir des ID providers, private ID providers. Pourquoi? Parce que le système d'identité numérique, il peut être un single point of failure, un point d'échec. Si ce système il va s'arrêter, il y a l'effet domino, il y a un effet cascade. il y a tous les autres services publics et privés qui dépendent de systèmes, ils vont s'arrêter tout simplement. Donc, c'est recommandé d'avoir plusieurs systèmes d'identité numérique, comme par exemple l'Estonie. Ils ont le Mobile ID, le Smart ID, comme pas mal d'autres pays. Finlande aussi, ils ont le Bank ID. Avec le Bank ID, il y a pas mal d'autres ID. Donc, de point de vue sécurité, ce n'est pas recommandé d'avoir un unique système d'identification numérique. Il faut avoir plusieurs systèmes pour ne pas paralyser tous les services électroniques en cas où ce système s'arrête. En cas où ce système, on a un problème au niveau de ce système. Je reviens à l'exemple de départ. Lorsqu'on part en ligne, on doit transformer tous les éléments de preuve. Tout d'abord, l'identité. On doit avoir aussi les services de confiance nécessaires, la signature électronique. On doit avoir le redatage et le cachet électronique. Et on doit être fidèle à la sécurité qui a été offerte au niveau du guichet lorsqu'on va en ligne. Souvent, dans pas mal de pays, chez pas mal de fournisseurs de services, lorsqu'ils font la transformation digitale, donc ils donnent juste au client des logins passwords, une authentification OTP, une authentification de facteurs. Ils se basent sur une identité qui n'est pas officielle, qui n'est pas reconnue par les textes. Donc, pour répondre à la question, pour protéger les systèmes d'identité numérique, tout d'abord, il faut protéger par les textes, par la loi. Il faut reconnaître ce système. Il faut différencier entre l'identité officielle et l'identité non officielle et différencier les cas d'usage, dire quand est-ce qu'on peut se recourir au système de EQYC et quand est-ce qu'on peut utiliser obligatoirement les systèmes d'identification numérique. Donc, il faut tout d'abord protéger et clarifier les choses par les textes. Puis, par la suite, vient les modèles techniques. Techniquement, c'est recommandé d'avoir plusieurs systèmes d'identité numérique. Il ne faut pas avoir un seul système. En cas d'échec, il va faire arrêter tous les services publics et privés. Maintenant, le deuxième point qui est le sujet de ce panel, la reconnaissance. À mon avis, il est temps d'avoir, comme en Europe, ils ont le ETSI, les standards ETSI, ils ont le LIDAS, on a des standards comme WebTrust. Donc, il est temps de mettre en place des référentiels et des standards pour le continent africain. Avec l'Union africaine ou bien avec Smart Africa, c'est important parce que comme ça, on va harmoniser les textes juridiques. On ne va pas avoir les mêmes textes. Non, on va les harmoniser et on va aligner tous les systèmes d'identité par rapport à un référentiel, par rapport à un haut niveau de sécurité. Donc, les référentiels, on ne va pas unifier les textes juridiques, mais plutôt, on va mettre en place un référentiel, c'est soft law, un référentiel continental qui va aider les États à harmoniser leurs textes et qui va aider les États à s'aligner par rapport à un bon niveau de sécurité. Merci.
Thank you very much, Dr. Beneji, for that very comprehensive overview. I could see the teacher in you coming out. And so I think really what I picked was, recognition of the ID by the legal and regulatory framework, very key. We don't all need common frameworks, but I think it's about ensuring that we have different mechanisms to authenticate and to validate our digital identities. So thank you very much for that submission. So back to my second round of panel questions. Back to Dr. Mark, Mr. Mark Loco. So Mr. Loco, in terms of human resource or human capital, what continental policy or institutional mechanisms are required to develop, sustain, and standardize cybersecurity human resource across the continent to effectively respond and to evolving cyber threats? We talk about a dynamic cyber threat landscape. What are some of the skills that you are seeing are required in Africa to support this? In maybe 2 minutes. I understand we are running out of time, so kind.
Alors, merci. Merci pour cette question et je ne pense pas qu'il y ait une réponse absolue. Ce dont nous sommes sûrs, c'est que Les expertises en matière de cybersécurité sont recherchées partout dans le monde. Là où nous recherchons, je dirais, quelques dizaines d'experts en cybersécurité dans nos pays, peut-être par mois ou je dirais même par trimestre. Vous avez des pays dans le monde qui en cherchent des dizaines de milliers. Cela veut dire que nous sommes sur un marché qui est mondial. Le jeune analyste en cybersécurité formé au Bénin, il va, à la fin de sa formation ou de sa première expérience, devenir un talent exposé au monde entier. Et donc, c'est à cette problématique-là que nous sommes confrontés, je pense, tous les pays africains. Nous commençons à former massivement, nous commençons à avoir des instituts, des écoles d'ingénieurs qui forment vraiment des profils de qualité. Mais à la fin de la journée, est-ce que nous avons cette capacité-là à absorber sur nos marchés les talents que nous formons? Je pense que c'est vraiment la problématique centrale à laquelle nous sommes confrontés. Et c'est pour cela que tout à l'heure, donc, lors de ma première prise de parole, je parlais des différentes politiques que nous avons mises en place, parce que donner les leviers pour stimuler finalement l'offre, enfin, en tout cas pour que la demande, en tout cas, rencontre l'offre en termes de talent, c'est justement la déclinaison de tous ces cadres réglementaires dont nous avons parlé à travers des politiques. Quand vous mettez en place une politique de protection des systèmes d'information, quand vous avez des politiques de protection des infrastructures critiques, cela veut dire que vous créez un cadre de nécessité pour se conformer justement à ces politiques-là. Et pour se conformer à ces politiques, cela veut dire que vous avez besoin de profils, d'auditeurs, vous avez besoin de cadres en capacité d'inspecter les différents acteurs donc, de votre écosystème. Et donc, in fine, vous stimulez quelque part une bonne dynamique dans l'écosystème. De la même manière, quand vous regardez le Bénin, nous avons également qualifié ce que nous appelons les fournisseurs de services de sécurité numérique. Donc, ces fournisseurs de services de sécurité numérique qualifiés peuvent prétendre à accéder à un certain nombre d'opportunités, répondre à des consultations, à des appels d'offres publics. Et donc, tout cela participe quelque part à stimuler l'écosystème que nous avons en matière de digitalisation de manière générale. Donc, je pense que la problématique des talents, elle va être clairement liée au marché, à la dynamique économique. Et donc, c'est sur cela que nous, en tout cas, nous nous concentrons et nous mettons en place également, en tout cas, pour pouvoir créer cette passerelle-là entre la formation elle-même et l'accès, je dirais, au marché. Nous avons justement un certain nombre d'événements que nous organisons chaque année, que ce soit des hackathons, un peu comme ce que nous appelons le Hacker Lab au Bénin, qui nous permettent de révéler vraiment des talents béninois. Nous avons la sous-région également à travers la CEDEAO qui a adopté également cette approche-là, puisque nous avons commencé à en avoir au niveau régional. Donc, ça permet vraiment de développer les compétences au niveau au niveau national et également au niveau régional. De la même manière, nous avons donc un CERT national au Bénin. Et donc, je pense que toutes les politiques aujourd'hui recommandent de pouvoir avoir des CERT sectoriels. Nous commençons à avoir des CERT spécialisés, donc des centres d'alerte et de réponse spécialisés, que ce soit dans l'éducation, que ce soit dans la finance, que ce soit même dans le secteur sur les activités liées à l'identité numérique. Donc, à travers justement ces initiatives-là, nous créons quelque part l'opportunité pour ces talents-là de pouvoir accéder au marché. Donc, la clé, in fine, c'est de pouvoir créer des conditions pour stimuler, une fois de plus, notre marché. Si l'économie est en pleine croissance, grâce justement tous les investissements que nous faisons en matière de digitalisation, in fine, nous permettons justement à des entreprises de pouvoir grandir dans notre écosystème, de pouvoir recruter ces talents-là. Et donc, je pense que cette problématique des talents, elle est globale à l'échelle du continent. Nous ne sommes pas encore à une étape où nous avons suffisamment de viviers. Je pense qu'il faut continuer à investir massivement, malgré le risque de pouvoir perdre des talents, parce qu'un pays qui investit massivement dans les talents, directement ou indirectement, il finit par bénéficier donc, de ces investissements-là. Donc nous, en tout cas au Bénin, nous sommes dans cette dynamique-là. Nous essayons également d'intégrer les principales fêtières que nous avons à l'international, que ce soit le FIRST, que ce soit l'Africa CERT. Et c'est à travers justement ces entités-là que nous permettons à nos équipes de pouvoir se former, de pouvoir être constamment en interaction avec l'état de l'art au niveau international. Merci.
Thank you very much, Mr. Loco. I think having talent, I think for what I got is having talent is one thing, but also retaining the talent is equally important to prevent brain drain, as has been witnessed across many countries in Africa. So I think that is a very good overview that you've provided. And moving on to Madam Tigist, I think national ID systems are critical infrastructure, can be considered to be critical information infrastructure. So looking at issues of business continuity planning and disaster recovery, in about 2 minutes, what standards should guide national business continuity plans and disaster recovery plan frameworks, in your opinion?
Good. Thank you again for the question. I think disaster recovery planning and business continuity planning is like you don't have to make it at the top of the cybersecurity. It should come first, since cybersecurity should follow the proactive measure. So in order to have a business continuity plan, first you have to start from the technological aspect. When you do data centers, when you do disaster recovery sites and everything, you should to have to avoid a single point of failure in technology, in human capital, in process as well. So in order to have the critical infrastructures to secure and to have a good insight on that, you have to have a good business continuity planning. For that, in my opinion, and since I'm in the ecosystem for a long period of time as an engineer as well, I have seen critical infrastructure agencies that are using a disaster recovery site in abroad. When I say abroad, it should be a sovereign cloud. We are talking about the business continuity, since it is a digital, from national digital identity to digital ecosystem. So we have to think twice when we set critical information in the cloud. So to be sovereign in any way, you have to have your own disaster recovery site, which is sovereign and which is under control of your own employees as well. So I have seen many countries that have deployed a disaster recovery, but it's an abroad in a cloud. So when you have that kind of limitation, you are not in control of your resource. So in case of risk, in case of cyber threat, and in case of emergency, like when an incident happens, you don't have a control of your own resource. So it's good to plan ahead of time, of course, but the disaster recovery and the business continuity plan, mainly it becomes a sovereign, digital sovereignty of the country. So the countries who planned earlier, who planned proactively, they manage their risks proactively. Even when it happens, the way you resolve and the recovery time will be shortened. Otherwise, we'll be in struggle. That's one of the things. The second thing, in disaster recovery and business continuity plan, you have to align with international standards. We do have a lot of ISO standards for risk management, for risk assessment and analysis. So you have to identify your critical infrastructure, and you have to set priority as well. Since cybersecurity and technology advancement is economic intensive, you have to have your priority for critical assets in order to have a business continuity plan. So you have to follow the ISO and IEC standards, but it should be localized to your country and localized to the environment as well. That's
Okay, thank you so much, Madam Tigis. I think the issue of sovereignty is really key, especially with the ongoing conflicts in the world. You've seen the impact of war on critical infrastructure. So I think really it's something that nations have to take with a lot of importance, so that they ensure that BCP and DRP plans they actually work. So going back to Mr. Reynolds, my second question to you would be, as nations across the continent establish legal frameworks to protect critical information infrastructure, how do you enforce compliance? And speaking as a regulator, I know this is an issue that has come up a lot of time, without stifling technological innovation or penalizing legitimate cybersecurity research. I know there's a very thin line between undertaking research and perhaps issues of national security. So how do you strike a balance in
Yeah.
about 2 minutes?
I'll be very quick here because I know we are running low on time. There are just 4 points that I had for this. The first one is you need to kind of set out the statutory authority for critical infrastructure. So let people know where the law applies. The second is I believe you should have risk-based obligations. So you don't want to be treating your telecom provider with the same kind of requirements that you're treating a two-person startup firm, because you will effectively kill off the two-person startup firm. So we need to do it risk-based. The third is we don't know where technology is evolving, so you should be tech neutral. And the fourth is you should have some safe harbors where researchers, people can actually get in and try and look for security vulnerabilities, disclose security vulnerabilities in a responsible way. And so those are the 4. Just one last quick example from MIT. We had a researcher on our team who was studying election security, electronic voting machines, and was able to hack into electronic voting machines. That was his research. But we had to spend a lot of time with the lawyers because the United States has a law on copyright, the DMCA, that says it is illegal to actually go around protections like this. So we had to work very carefully in order to do research on something as critical as voting in a country. So we need to make sure that that is available. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I think I really like the aspect of the safe harbors. In Kenya, we've implemented a regulatory sandbox where innovators are able to explore similar issues before going out to the market. So I think, and perhaps also we need to look at the laws again, relook at the laws so that we allow these innovations to be handled in a safe space without any legal consequences. So thank you for that submission. So Mr. Prosper, what role does digital forensics play in strengthening prosecution capacity? How can the prosecution be enabled to better undertake their responsibilities from a digital forensic standpoint? 5 minutes. We are running in 1 minute. Then you can have Dr. Benej. Perhaps you can have 2 questions after. Sorry.
Oui, merci beaucoup. Comme je l'ai dit, dans la pratique, il y a des défis en termes de mise en place des organes qui doivent soutenir l'application des textes qui sont pris dans le sillage du numérique, notamment dans la répression de la cybercriminalité. Et moi, dans le cadre de mes recherches, j'ai découvert beaucoup de choses parce que c'est vrai que le timing politique fait face à beaucoup d'exigences en termes de mise en place effective des organes, mais la pratique n'attend pas. On parle d'identité numérique et le terrain congolais, qui est un terrain très heuristique, démontre que dans la pratique des juridictions pénales, ce sont les infractions relatives aux droits communs qui ont été les plus usuelles en matière de cybercriminalité. Donc la plupart des juridictions ont eu à trancher sur des faits des diffamations en ligne ou sur des faits d'usurpation d'identité. Donc ça, sont des éléments concrets qui se sont posés devant les juridictions parce que dès qu'on a eu le code du numérique, eh bien, tout ce qui n'était pas juridiquement identifié comme infraction l'a été, et désormais, les gens se sont référés à des parquets pour poursuivre ce genre d'infraction. Alors, le parquet a usé très souvent des moyens simples. Donc, premièrement, c'est le recours à l'expertise. On requiert très souvent des entreprises de télécommunications lorsqu'il s'agit des infractions qui rentrent dans ce sillage. Et le deuxième temps, c'est aussi une forme de coopération parce que je suis tombé quand même sur une affaire où l'Interpol a été requis. Donc, il y a eu le concours de l'Interpol pour rechercher un groupe de personnes qui étaient mêlées à des infractions de diffamation. Après, d'autres questions qui se posent reviennent encore au niveau de la légalité parce que même lorsqu'on analyse les textes, tout n'est pas complet, en ce sens que des défis technologiques ne sont pas complètement toujours pris en charge dans les législations. Il y a par exemple une question qui s'est posée parce qu'il y a une affaire dans laquelle des gens ont été condamnés et le rapport de police indiquait que l'entité qui avait été requise avait procédé à une géolocalisation, ce qui a posé un peu de discussions sur le plan de la légalité, de la régularité de ces méthodes. Donc, ceci démontre que tout autant que la technologie va vite et que les lois, les institutions doivent être mises en place, mais la logique dans la pratique peut être aussi un peu différente en ce que lorsqu'il s'agit de réprimer, même les organes d'enquête établis, c'est-à-dire les parquets civils ou militaires qui existent, n'hésitent pas à recourir à des technologies, à des expertises pour pouvoir donner la réponse légale à la question qui est posée. Donc je pense qu'à ce stade, le champ est très ouvert et l'avantage que peut-être l'Afrique a de façon générale, c'est de s'inspirer des expériences mutuelles entre pays, mais de regarder aussi ce qui s'est fait ailleurs pour que nous puissions implémenter les systèmes les plus adaptés à nos cultures et à nos lois. Voilà.
Okay, thank you very much, Prosper. I think the element of using law enforcement to expert witnesses, I think, has been instrumental in many different countries to assist in the judicial officers in achieving their mandates. So I think finally, the last question, going to Dr. Beneji. So as national digital identity systems become critical infrastructure and preferred targets for cyber criminals, how can governments effectively protect national ID systems against large-scale threats such as DDoS? We've seen that across the continent, mass phishing campaigns, identity spoofing, and increasingly sophisticated AI-driven attacks, while preserving usability, privacy, and public trust. In a minute or so.
Ok, merci. Merci pour la question. Donc, venons au sujet des risques sur les systèmes d'identité numérique. Bon, avant de parler des risques, il est important de rappeler que les systèmes d'identité numérique dans le monde, peut-être les premiers pays qui ont déjà mis en place ça, Singapour, au début c'était un SMS-based identité numérique basé sur les SMS, puis les systèmes, ils ont évolué. Donc dans le monde, l'âge de ce genre de système, c'est une vingtaine d'années. En Afrique, c'est 5-6 ans. Donc on apprend au fur et à mesure, on apprend et essaie d'appliquer, de mettre en place, disons, la sécurité nécessaire pour essayer de protéger les citoyens. Un autre point aussi que j'aimerais évoquer avant les risques, lorsqu'on parle d'identité numérique, il n'y a pas uniquement l'identité numérique pour le citoyen. Il y a aussi le corporate ID, l'identité numérique pour les entreprises. Il y a aussi l'identité numérique pour les objets, l'ID of things, l'identité numérique pour les objets. Il y a aussi le challenge de lier les identités, le challenge des habilitations. Ça veut dire qu'une personne, il peut remplacer une autre personne, la délégation délégations des habilitations entre les individus. La représentation légale aussi. Une personne physique peut représenter une entité légale en utilisant les ID, Digital ID ou le Corporate ID. Il y a pas mal de challenges qui rendent la mise en place et le design et la cybersécurité de ce genre de système très compliqué. Revenons maintenant au sujet du risque et parlons des risques à l'échelle nationale. Ça veut dire les choses à laquelle les décideurs et les États doivent faire beaucoup d'attention lorsqu'on met en place un système d'identification numérique. Le premier risque, c'est le risque de fuite des données, parce que souvent, ce genre de système et ce genre d'infrastructure, au niveau de ce genre d'infrastructure, surtout on est face à des populations qui ne sont pas bien initiées, qui n'ont pas la culture digitale nécessaire pour bien se protéger en ligne. Ça, c'est un risque aussi considérable à considérer. Voilà. Il y a pas mal de risques ici, les risques qui ont un impact d'une grande envergure. Donc, les solutions qu'il faut mettre en place, qu'il faut opter. Tout d'abord, il y a les mesures et les solutions d'anticipation. Il faut toujours anticiper. Il faut toujours garder une longueur d'avance sur le problème. Il faut mettre en place des solutions de threat hunting, des solutions pour observer le comportement, essayer pour éviter les problèmes, pour ne pas les subir. Ça, c'est les mesures qu'il faut mettre en place d'abord. Puis, il y a les mesures de prévention. Les mesures de prévention, c'est du genre faire des audits de manière régulière, faire des updates de manière régulière pour ce genre de système, pour qu'ils ne deviennent pas obsolètes, pour qu'ils ne deviennent pas vulnérables avec le temps. Il y a aussi les mesures de détection. Il faut mettre en place des solutions de détection pour détecter de manière tôt, early detection, de manière tôt les problèmes, les incidents pour intervenir à temps. Puis il faut mettre en place et il faut entraîner les équipes d'urgence, les CERT, les équipes d'urgence pour intervenir à temps, pour confiner les problèmes, limiter les dégâts. Et il ne faut pas oublier la restauration en cas de problème. Et on a parlé des business continuity plans ou des disaster recovery plans, les solutions pour pouvoir restaurer et rétablir l'activité. Voilà, merci.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ben Neji. I think those are very elaborate points, elements of, you talked about identity theft and the risk of data breach, considering issues of point of failure, phishing. So the users have to be educated and sensitized on some of the risks, also detection and prevention, issues of national CERTs, etc. So I think those are some of the considerations that have to be taken to ensure that we can cover some of these risks. I think we might not have time for questions. I think Solomon is looking at me with a side eye, so we might not have an opportunity to have questions, but I think we'll have a group photo. Then the panelists are still around, so if you have a question, you can feel free to reach out to any of them, just to address any of the concerns that you might have. Thank you very much for listening. I think they deserve a round of applause, and have a good rest of the day. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for your time for our morning session. The photographers, if you are here, please, you take pictures of our speakers. We will be meeting here. We will be meeting here at 12 o'clock for the next session. So just go network, but look at your time and make sure that we are here. We start exactly at 12 o'clock. Thank you very much.
So my name's Carsten Maple. I'm going to start the proceedings with a presentation. We'll then hear from one of my colleagues, Dr. Mirko Bottarelli from the University of Warwick and the Alan Turing Institute. We'll then hear from William from the World Bank, and I'll do an introduction a little bit later, a presentation from Idris Zakaria, and then we will have a panel. So thank you for joining me today. Hopefully you're all interested in cybersecurity, and that's why you're here today. This is my first time for one of these silent conferences, but very exciting, and I hope that you enjoy it too. So I'm going to talk about trustworthy digital infrastructure for identity systems, a $9 million project funded by the Gates Foundation, run at the Alan Turing Institute, that have been released that are relevant to digital public infrastructure. And we have an X account as well, where we highlight the latest news. Next slide, please. So I mentioned earlier that one of the key things we do, as well as that regular reporting of relevant CVEs, what we also do is we have quarterly reports. So one of our most recent reports was looking at, so the deep dive that we had was looking at generative AI and the rise of credential fraud in digital public infrastructure. Next slide, please. So what did we find in this? So what we did is we looked at the common vulnerabilities and exploits and common weakness enumeration, and we found that they'd surged 300% within just 5 years. And of course, as these vulnerabilities and weaknesses are released, what happens is that there's a bigger opportunity for people to exploit those vulnerabilities. We've seen a substantial growth in the synthetic identity data fraud surge. So what's happening is, because of generative AI, we're getting deepfakes. So deepfakes are different to the previously used shallow fakes. So if any of you know what shallow fakes are, they're actually where you might have used Photoshop or some other kind of tool to manipulate an image.
People who did it manually many years ago as well. But now, because of generative AI, synthetic identity fraud is rocketing globally. And we're seeing an increase in cross-border crimes. Next slide, please. So where do we get our data from? So we get our data from the vulnerability databases. And in this report, we looked at databases over a 5-year period. We looked at sectoral reports. So many sectors will have deep dives. So we looked at finance, healthcare, and government. We surveyed the academic literature. So one thing is that new attacks on systems are built first in the laboratory often, not always. There may be zero-day attacks, but sometimes they're released in the academic or industry literature. And standards bodies such as NIST or cooperation bodies such as ENISA, which is the European Cybersecurity Agency, also release information. And finally, we look at policy frameworks, so the DPI, UN DPI safeguards, which many of you will know, as well as NIST and others as well. Next, please. So here's just a graph showing how deepfake relevant CWEs have been released. So as we see with deepfakes, that is given a steady growth year on year. The data in 2025 was only to September, because this report was the report that was released in Q4 last year. But you can see it was already close to the level of 2024. And actually, by the time of the end of 2025, it had exceeded that value. Next, please. So these are the things that we talk about in the report. AI as a service, unfortunately, because AI has been democratized, it means that people are able to offer services. So crime as a service, AI as a service, and that rise in deepfakes. We're seeing synthetic media marketplaces, the industrialized cybercrime models, and cross-sector breach propagation. So actually, sometimes people will try to create a breach in one sector, so that might be in your finance sector, and then use that to attack your national identity system. So we have seen that in at least one country that we've had good conversations with. Next slide, please. So what we think is that we need to design inclusive AI-enabled public service delivery. AI is being used to compromise our systems, but we should also use AI to deliver effective service. We need to safeguard privacy. Privacy is changing significantly. Now that there's a lot of data sets that we can bring together, the opportunity to identify people is increased. When we try to identify somebody from a data set or a set of data across different data sets, what happens is we're looking for patterns. Actually, AI is getting increasingly good at understanding these patterns and resolving the entity that we're talking about. Next slide, please. So the implications for DPI security is that there's an amplification of security risk because we're becoming more connected, and this conference is about the ecosystem, right? So it's from DPI to the DPI ecosystem. As that becomes more connected, you end up with a breach being in one area being propagated across the whole ecosystem. We think it's important to put secure design principles. Sorry, speak up. Okay, sorry. Thank you. We think it's important to have secure design principles and have continuous monitoring and threat modeling. So threat modeling is where you actually analyze the current threat landscape and check on the impact on your own infrastructure. Next slide, please. So another thing is cross-domain vigilance. I mentioned before healthcare, and I also mentioned finance. What's important is that we have cross-domain vigilance, so we share information across our domains. That can be difficult because often it becomes fragmented for governments. We also think that continuously tracking emerging CVEs, and that's what we're trying to do, is to look for patterns in these vulnerabilities. Next slide, please. So we have in this report released a digital ID safety pack. I won't go through them now, but you can see we cover technical controls, governance and policy measures, and if we go to the next slide, we cover cross-border collaboration and future-proofing identity systems. So if you'd like to know more about those, please do come and see me afterwards or see Sanjith or look at the website. Next slide, please. So this is where the key takeaways are. What we want is global security is a priority. Your citizens and your residents are relying on your digital public infrastructure. It is really important to collaborate and share. And one thing that we do see is that sharing is something that criminals will do. So some of you will have heard of the Yahoo Boys, for example, where they will deliberately either sell or share information about how to compromise people and systems. Security by design needs to be more than a principle. It needs to be actionable. And we are trying to release the mechanisms to make that actionable. And finally, proactive risk mitigation. Make sure your systems are resilient and anticipate risks, anticipate breaches before they happen. And that's the end of my presentation, I believe. Can you have the next slide? We're now going to hear from my colleague. It's a video, unfortunately, he couldn't be with us, but he will talk about cross-border identity federation. So if Michigan, we could play that video, thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Mirko Bottarelli. I'm a researcher in the Alan Turing Institute, and today I'm going to go through two projects, starting with the Cross-Border Identity Federation. So, why does cross-border identity matter? And the answer is quite simple, because we start from a simple fact that the people move. So more than 280 million migrants move worldwide. They are not only long-term migrants, most of them are also students, workers, travelers, and they need to access services provided by the foreign countries. And those services usually rely on the validation of the identities, especially digital identities. Now, here is the gap, because those identities are usually easily validated only in the country of origin. They don't travel together with the individuals. So this is why in this project we try to investigate, to explore this possibility. And we also need to recognize that there is a strong momentum in this direction, starting from the European Union, that I think at the end of this year requires that all the members agree on an interoperable cross-border digital identity wallet. The African Union is moving in a similar trajectory. This just to say that the politics are already there, but we are far behind from the technical aspect. Why? Because today identity providers, or IDP, they are designed and deployed usually only in thinking about a single country scenario. So there is no ready mechanism for a user to log in to a foreign country using its own identity provided by the country of origin. And this is due to two main classes of constraints, a technical one and a trust one. So if we start from the latter, it's very complex, because there are so many trust relationships between users and identity providers and the relying parties, and all of them are bidirectional. Each of those relationships also, they require a level of assurance, especially divided into identity assurance, authentication assurance, federation assurance, and all of those in turns also are divided into levels, where level 1 is usually for very simple scenario, and the level 3 is for high sensitive contexts like financial or healthcare. And on top of that, we also have the trust framework itself. So what is the trust framework? It is an overarching structure that makes everything coherent. So a trust framework combines the ecosystem rules together with the technical standards, together with the legal structure, and so on. So without a framework of this kind, even if compatible systems are technically, could be federated, we cannot do that in a proper, meaningful, and safe way. So to cope with this challenge, what we did in Turing is to prepare a framework called the SAFI that elicits some points that must be considered before even doing the step of the federation. The first point, for example, is the pre-engagement analysis, which means that even before sitting down at the table to discuss federation, each side need to understand where they are, for example, what standards they use, what assurance level they operate at, and what are the legal frameworks that govern their system. And this will avoid to stop formal negotiation just because parties didn't understand the gap they are dealing with. A second part is related to providing a language that is intentionally neutral to simplify both parties, to share where they are aligned and where they start to diverge. It also helps parties to what we call to support risk-informed scoping. So just to say that not all interoperability is equally feasible or equally urgent. So SAFI helps governments to understand which scenario are achievable now, which one should be supported by additional governance, and where those risks lie. And finally, there is support to prepare pilots, eliciting the assumptions, the constraints, and the sequences required. Very quick about the technical requirements. First of all, we identified that there is a huge need for protocol translation. Whatever you use, SAML or OpenID Connect, the identity assertion must be preserved by the translation layer because nothing can be dropped or distorted in the transit. Credential management must apply in the full life cycle of the identity, from the secure enrollment, from the update, to the update and the revocation. And especially attention should be done to the duplication of identity, so just one identity for each person. Scalability-wise, it's highly important to optimize the processes for low bandwidth environments, and I think this is even more important for the African context. Security-wise, I think it's probably the straightforward point here, so encryption everywhere. The encryption keys must be stored in hardware protected, and the schema validation in all information exchange. Privacy, it's a last, but in reality is a first class concern, where data minimization, usage of differential privacy techniques should be, of primary interest. Now, at the moment, we connect the relying parties towards the national identity system using a component called a SIGNET. So a SIGNET is an OpenID connector gateway that allows to use a standardized way to connect the relying party to the identity system. eSignet was created by MOSIP team, but it's not limited to MOSIP only, because it contains a plugin structure that can be expanded to connect the SIGNET to different other identity providers. And this is the typical flow that you can see. It's similar to what you use every day when you log in to a website using OpenID Connect. So the only part that I want you to keep in mind is this blue arrow at the end, where the token provided as a result of the authentication is spent in a secure way, which means in a secure channel by the relying party to retrieve the identity from the SIGNET backend. Secure way means that they know each other, so the relying party is enrolled as a proper client to the SIGNET backend. There is a limitation here, so we cannot apply the same scheme for cross-border interoperability. Let me explain why. So if we try to connect the SIGNET backend directly to the foreign country national ID, this technically does not work because the SIGNET backend and the national ID system usually are inside the same internal secure network. So there is no way to jump to another country without exposing the entire system. If instead we try on the other side, so the relying party jumping directly to the foreign SIGNET, this is potentially correct. However, we have a problem in scalability because every relying party must reach a bilateral agreement with all possible foreign countries. So what we propose is a technique that was explored also by MOSIP 3 years ago, and we brought back to life and aligned with the latest version of the identity system and the SIGNET, which is based on this idea of proxy, which is in reality the concatenation of two OpenID Connect flows. So in the starting flow, we have the relying party, as we said before, connecting always to the local SIGNET. The local SIGNET at this point becomes, from the server, becomes the client of a second OpenID transaction towards the foreign SIGNET. The foreign SIGNET now has the duty to retrieve the token and to send back to the first SIGNET, which again, with closing the first transaction, forward this token to the relying party. So beside the technical aspects that I don't want to enter in this moment, we have some clear advantages here. So first of all, we only require a trusted channel or a bilateral agreement between pairs of SIGNETs, which means between pairs of countries. And automatically, all the relying parties will exploit that agreement without, doing something more specific. So let me give you a demo. Okay, so before starting, I just want to say that we tried the flow on two MOSIP deployments that we did on the University of Warwick infrastructure. They are full MOSIP deployment in the sense that they are exactly the same as you can find in a normal country level deployment. And we worked with the MOSIP team to validate also those setups. So now we are here in Warwick 1, you can see from the address bar. And instead of logging in with a local account, we decide to sign in with a signet. So this is the page of a signet UI, again Warwick 1, so the local country. Instead of logging in with the local credentials, we press the button corresponding to the second MOSIP instance. So the page is similar, but we are now, as you can see, in a second instance, and you can also see that now the client is not anymore the relying party, but it's the local country signet that we just left. So here we can log in a traditional way using, for example, the UIN number. Okay, so we also have the opportunity of sharing or not sharing voluntary claims that will improve the experience, but they are not mandatory, for the service provided by the reliant party. And by allowing, you can see that first of all, we go back to Warwick 1 a signet, and then back again to the corresponding health services. In the second phase of the presentation, I just want to update on this stuff. So this stuff is a framework and a tool that we created to measure the trustworthiness of digital identity systems. It's a framework composed by 6 pillars in order to measure, like a spectrum, in 6 dimensions, the trustworthiness of each component of the identity system along security, privacy, ethics, robustness, reliability, and resilience. Now, this stuff, among all different outputs that it can provide, I think the most important one is what we call the trustworthiness fingerprint. And the fingerprint is a visual representation of the system trustworthiness profile along all the dimensions. Think it as a radar or a spider chart, you can see in this photo. And the shape tells you immediately where the system is strong and where the gaps are. But why is this so important? Because it's quickly understandable by any type of stakeholders that maybe are not deep technical experts to engage with, detailed results meaningfully. So, like a policymaker looking at this fingerprint can instantly see whether the system has gaps in privacy protection or in governance or in security, without the need to wade through pages of technical findings. And also the fingerprint can be thought as a planning tool, because if you conduct many assessments, let's say at the design stage and the prototype stage and then at the deployment, you can overlay those fingerprints and see the trajectory. Just a quick update on the latest developments on this stuff, because it's an evolving tool. So first of all, it was completely rewritten using a full open source stack, focusing on the ease of deployment. This is because we noticed that one of the barriers to adoption is that organizations, specifically lower resources environments, found it difficult to set up and to run. So we removed as many dependencies as possible. We created a container that can be deployed and run very easily. And also, going in the direction of open source, it also allows the community to contribute and to scrutinize, which aligns with the transparency values that are also central to this stuff design. A second part of developments were done to improve the UI of the system to make it much quicker to use. There is also a possibility to export and to import assessments that can be shared and filled, using external tools like CSV or Excel files. Just a quick words on this stuff adoption. Let me close with this important part. So in Ethiopia, the National Identity Program, together with the HADAR team, used this stuff for self-assessment through an Alan Turing Institute supported engagement. In Benin, we have conducted exploratory discussion on using this stuff across different stages of the national identity system. In Sri Lanka, the engagement has reached a particularly interesting stage. So the government is planning to include this stuff as a formal requirement for their system integrators. That means, in other words, that any vendor or contractor working on a Sri Lankan national identity system could potentially need to conduct and submit this stuff assessment as a part of the deliverables. With MOSIP, there is so close engagement with the MOSIP team that I want to thank you also. We are in a initial phase where result of an assessment has been shared with them, and now we are documenting the learnings in a form that can be shared with a broader community. And finally, we are in an early stage discussion with several major consulting firms who are interested in incorporating this stuff in their own advisory and audit practices. Thank you, everyone, and I hope to receive your questions by mail or any other means. Thank you again.
So we'll now go back to the slides. I'll just finish off here. So if we go to the next slide, please. So one thing that we want to do is to create a DPI signals exchange, cyber signals exchange, a way for all of you to share information so that we get better intelligence. Could we go back one slide, please? Because I'd just like to share with people the opportunity to join with us and get some advice from this Gates-funded project. So in a moment, we'll go backwards and we'll see the QR code. I just need the QR code, please. Thank you so much. So if you want to contact us at all, please just reach out to tdi@turing.ac.uk. And if you scan that link, that will help. But we're really keen to learn from you, to inform our research, and to help you benefit from that research. Thank you very much. Okay, so my next speaker is William Zhang from the World Bank. I'm really pleased to have him with us because when we were in Cape Town, what must have been 2 years ago, we did some work with the World Bank, and ultimately it led to a publication. The other slide, please, presentation, not this. Because William, who is the global lead for digital safeguards at the World Bank Group, leads efforts in enhancing the maturity of cybersecurity practices in developing countries. As I said, this report, you can see it here, this practitioner's note. I do hope you'll be able to download it. But I'd like to invite William up right now. He was previously at the Bank for International Settlements Innovation Hub and gained his PhD from the University of Maryland after finishing a bachelor's over at the University of Peking, where I've had the pleasure of speaking at both of those institutions. But William, please take the microphone.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I think maybe we can go back to that slide with the QR code. So just to give you some background on World Bank and these kind of knowledge products. So, you typically know the World Bank as a organization that provides financing for development projects, but we are also a knowledge provider. We started a big initiative about 15 years ago called Open Data, where we made a lot of the economic development data available for free for download. So if you just search open data on Google, usually we show up on top. So that's one side of the knowledge product we provide, which is structured data. But then we also have a lot of these publications. So these publications are, falling into two categories. One is policy. So basically, based on our experience working with developing countries, we came up with these, knowledge or policy documents to help countries make policy decisions based on their country's context. And then the second kind of knowledge product is like this, where we summarize what we have learned through multiple projects across multiple countries and identify some common themes and then put them into one document so that people can learn from each other. So this is the learning we have achieved by working with partners such as the Alan Turing Institute on cybersecurity best practices for identity systems. So let's go to the next slide. So just like Carsten was mentioning, that the cyber landscape is really getting worse and worse because of AI. So, before AI, the biggest threat was ransomware attacks. So this is happening every year in all kinds of sectors, all kinds of geographic locations. Organizations are hit by ransomware attacks, and then they were forced by the attacker to pay, often in Bitcoin. Otherwise, their site or their data are being locked that cannot be used, and their service is having an outage. But since the advent of large language models, we have seen a big uptick of AI-generated attacks. So, Carson was showing a bar chart that how quickly the number of vulnerabilities are being reported. A lot of these are actually generated by AI. So the rate of growth of these newly discovered vulnerabilities is so high that the organization that called NIST, which was the central organization that is analyzing the nature of these vulnerabilities and providing technical guidance for organizations to deal with them, just informed the community that they are no longer able to handle all these vulnerabilities. So they will only be able to focus on the vulnerability that are rated at high severity, and then they're leaving the rest to the community to figure out how to handle. So that's where organizations such as the Cyber Intelligence Observatory and others, would play a role in picking up the rest of the vulnerability and see how we can help each other to come up with a countermeasures. And the key thing is that we have to use AI for our defense, because today, AI is used extensively by the attackers to find vulnerabilities and come up with a plan to attack systems. And if we don't use AI, even if we know about these vulnerabilities, we will not, be able to patch them at a speed that's good enough to defend ourselves. So the use of AI for defense is an imperative that we have to look into how to do it. Next slide, please. So, we look into the cybersecurity for identity system because this is the foundation for the digital public infrastructure and government services. If an identity system is compromised, then everything else will suffer. Your government payments will suffer, and your social protection program, your health care program will all suffer. So we have to, look at this very carefully to look at the whole ecosystem for identity, from your design phase, your identity registration phase, and the authentication step, and then eventually how data is being used and being shared across different agencies, different service providers. So there's a lot of area that things can go wrong through this whole ecosystem that we have to analyze carefully using threat modeling, and then get the proper countermeasures designed into the whole process. Let's move on to the next slide. So from a defense perspective, you have some fundamentals that are at the national level. For example, the foundations, right? Do we have a national cyber response function, right? A CERT, sometimes called just CERT. So this is very fundamental, where you have an organization that can coordinate the response in case something goes wrong, and we can assure each other that something will go wrong down the road. And also things like a GovSOC, government-oriented security operations center, that is monitoring in real time what's happening in critical government systems and identify any potential compromise and come out with a response plan. Hopefully, AI is being used in that response plan so that you can respond quickly to patch the system and before the attacker get to it. And then security by design, there's a lot of very specific controls. That has been done by research institutions, which you have seen some presentations so far. And then I believe there's more, around, say, biometric authentication systems. What are the specific security control? You need to look into that from not only enrollment, authentication stage, but data storage, data usage, how to keep those secure. Operational resilience. So this is where, you had to be prepared in terms of what if something did go wrong. Do you have a backup, or do you have a plan to quickly identify the devices that have been compromised, be able to recall them and reissue replacement devices? So this resilience is something you have to think carefully, have this designed in your overall solution, because we cannot guarantee bad things will not happen. The only thing we can assure to the community is that we are prepared for things that could go wrong. And then finally, there's an area that we have to look into, how to take innovative approach for cyber defense. That will go into a little bit more details later on. Next slide, please. So here are some examples. We talk about establishment of the national cybersecurity foundational capabilities, such as the CERT. But this is a investment sometimes may not be affordable by government who are resource constrained. So this is where Togo has explored an interesting public-private partnership model, where they got some financial concession from the technology provider, where the government can pay less than typically will be required to establish the CERT, and then there is a way for the technology provider to recapture some of the costs over a long time, so that the country can at least have this capability quickly without a significant capital investment that are beyond their available resources. And then Ghana has also a very elaborative approach, where they started with the legal foundations And then with the establishment of these national capabilities, and then looking to the specific system level or service level cybersecurity controls. So they worked with World Bank and other organizations for over 10 years to establish this whole cybersecurity architecture, from legal to national capabilities, to sectoral capabilities, to the system level security controls. So that's a holistic approach that does take quite some time and a significant amount of investment over years. Next slide, please. So another good example is Estonia, where they have established very important components such as the national PKI, because PKI is such a important component to provide a foundation for trust in the digital space, for identity, for any document signing or other functions that the government want to provide to both citizens and businesses. And then they established a lot of the capabilities based on international cybersecurity standards, but they also were quite well prepared to deal with any potential fallouts. For example, there was a cyber event that happened in 2017 that made a good number of already issued eID card no longer secure, no longer trustworthy. So they were able to collaborate across multiple government agencies to identify which of the cards that are no longer trustworthy. They were able to recall them quickly and have the new cards using the patch technology being issued within weeks. So that was a very good success story that you all need to keep in mind, right? If something happens to your national identity system, are you able to respond within weeks to get this resolved? And then they also had this whole transparency program to create trust from their citizens on this national identity system, where they allow citizens to have access in terms of how many different government agencies, also service providers, have got access to a citizen's data. So this is a very detailed level of transparency that you want to think about, how much can you accomplish by earning trust from your citizens by providing this kind of transparency. Next slide, please. So a government SOC or a security operations center specifically dedicated to national identity system is something you want to consider, right? Whether you want to just use the existing government SOC to cover your national identity system, or you have a specific identity oriented security operations center. So the India example is a dedicated SOC for their identity system because it's such a large nation, a massive rollout. Where Estonia had a dedicated SOC for their X-Road implementation. Again, because this is a distributed architecture, there's so many parties involved, a lot of things can go wrong. So that's where it's worthwhile to have a central or a dedicated SOC just for the X-Road interoperability platform to watch what's going on with all these data exchanges between the different government entities and potential also service providers. And Singapore, they decided to use a government SOC just to monitor their critical digital services, including their identity platform. So there are different options you can think about based on the size of your population, your identity system, and how much capacity your existing government SOC can accommodate, or do you need a dedicated identity SOC? Next slide, please. So from an operational resilience perspective, again, there are many considerations. So India, again, this is a very a massive system. They have built a lot of building resilience from cybersecurity perspective. They also have the technology called tokenization, where they don't use the actual identity. They use a surrogate, use a tokenized ID for services that are being provided by other entities, so that in case that entity got compromised, only the surrogate identity is impacted. The native identity would not be exposed. So they have thought about different ways to make them more resilient in case something goes wrong with this, one of these large number of players in the overall ecosystem. Yeah, next slide, please. So I think, if we think about the level of maturity a country may go through in their overall identity system maturity or a journey, you can think about, initially, at least you should have a chief information security officer who is responsible for the cybersecurity program for your identity or DPI service stack. And then over time, you want to build a competent cybersecurity team who is, both doing the security by design upfront, but also doing the security operation, for the back end. And then, if you can have the resource to build extended cybersecurity team and be able to apply zero trust architecture, zero trust principles to the overall identity system, and then potentially have regular penetration tests, or sometimes known as the red teaming exercise by a trusted third party, that will be at a quite advanced level, and also have a ISO 27001 certification for the organization who are managing the identity ecosystem. That will be the ideal situation. Next slide, please. So this is where you can also adopt some of the more advanced techniques. So here, Singapore has been using something called the bug bounty program. So they have the vulnerability disclosure program or policy that they share with the cybersecurity community, who are well-intended. They're doing their research, trying to find issues with existing system and report them to the authority before they disclose them to the general public. So this is something you want to consider, to have this kind of policy, encourage a disclosure to the right authority, but not to the public before this issue is addressed. They also offer financial incentives to a bug bounty program to allow researchers or general public who have the capacity to test the national national identity system to see if there is any vulnerabilities in the system, and then if they found anything, they can be get rewarded once it's validated, so that the authority can get access to a large pool of talent beyond the number of resources they can retain within the government. Of course, there are many other things you can do. The use of AI, machine learning for fraud detection, because the use of AI for synthetic ID or fake IDs in the identity system is very pervasive. So we have to use AI to fight that. And the use of AI for liveliness detection, I think, maybe I remember there's maybe some discussion on this topic during this panel as well. And then, collaboration with law enforcement and also use legal tools as a deterrence, so that, people who are, trying to abuse the identity system could get punished severely. Next slide, please. So overall, I think the use of the whole community, right, from legal to researchers to the general community, to collaboration with international counterparts, a collaboration between different agencies within the country. These are all the tools you want to think about how to leverage them to create a cybersecurity defense architecture for your identity and overall DPI services stack. So I think that's all I want to share for now.
Thank you very much. And if we can go back to the slide, thank you. So a great presentation there. Thank you, William. It was a real pleasure for the Alan Turing Institute to work with the World Bank on that project. And one thing I want to draw out, there's so much information in there, please do look at it. But one thing I want to draw out is the 2017 flaw in Estonia. So it said around 800,000 EID cards were compromised. Just to give an idea, in 2017, there were about 1.3 million people, right? So that's more than 60% of the country. And think about how would that impact your country and the people within it if 60% of your digital identity cards and the whole stack relies on, what would happen if 60% couldn't access those services? And that's one of the things I said, as we start to use DPI much more, it becomes integrated into what we do, and it becomes an important thing to make any kinds of transaction. So that resilience, I think, is a really important point. So that's one takeaway I would take away from that. But thank you very much, William. We're now going to hear from Dr. Idris Zakaria. Idris is a researcher at the Alan Turing Institute working with us. And he got his PhD a number of years ago now and is working as a postdoctoral research assistant. He's going to talk about robustness of AI-based face presentation, attack detection in identity proofing. So please, Idris.
Thank you very much, Professor Custom, for the wonderful introduction. Yeah, today I am going to discuss the attack-based biometric authentication systems. We have seen from different sessions, people are using biometric for authentication, especially in digital identity. So these systems can be manipulated, as we can see from the presentation from Williams. And also there are various attacks based in this system. So we also have to test the robustness of the AI we use to protect this system, especially in digital identity. Next slide, please. Yeah, we can see this is the background on motivation. So face biometric is being used everywhere in national ID, finance, cross-border, and many more. Yeah, but we also seen the evidence of AI-driven manipulation where various attacks can be launched, especially fraud and many more attacks. One of them is mopping attacks, where you can be able to use an image to match multiple identities, and that's also catastrophic and dangerous. We also have presentation attacks, which are just attacks from the sensor level, which are based on spoofings, and also we use a detection model to detect presentation attack and liveness. But what is the common gap that we find is like existing solutions for presentation attack and also the injection attack lack identity proofing. They didn't test robustness when someone tried to hack the systems, when someone tried to hack the model. So people are lacking this gap. So that's why what we are just trying to cover. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is a simple trade view. You can see various attack-based biometrics. We can see presentation attack here, And we also have some of their example of presentation attack, which include marks, spoofing, and also like we use to detect this at the sensor level. And we also have adversarial attack, where the attacker use some image to generate another image to bypass the authentication systems by making it useless, by lowering the attack accuracy. So we also have injection attack, which is false data injection is one of them. And also we have image media stream manipulations. Next slide, please. Yeah, so in benchmarking presentation attack, there is this ISC metric, which is like based on attack presentation classification error and also bona fide classification error. And these are used for testing security and usability. So we also have to test the resilience of the model when someone trying to attack the systems by using the knowledge of the model, the architecture, the AI model, or using some black box mechanism. Next slide, please. Yeah, we have various types of adversarial attacks, and these are just attacks generated adversarially by taking an original image, adding some noise to it to confuse the systems. We have the white box attack. With this type of attack, the attacker have the knowledge of the AI model, AI architecture, so he can be able to get some insight from the gradient of the model and add some noise to the original image to create an adversarial image to peg the model. And also we have the black box attack, which is more dangerous because this doesn't require the knowledge of the AI used for face biometric. It just zero knowledge of model and its parameter. It just tries to query some output and see how the systems can react. Next slide, please. Yeah, so these are the procedure of generating adversarial attacks. It involves some adding some noise. You take originally the image and you add some noise following these parameters there. And the X at ADB is the adversarial input image. And we'll also have the perturbation magnitude, which controls the amount of noise we injected into the image. And that's the epsilon value. Next slide, please. So the biggest implication of adversarial attacks is if you look at these two images there, you cannot be able to differentiate them because this is the authentic input, and we also have add some perturbation and we generate adversarial input. So by mere looking, you cannot be able to distinguish between these two images there. But one is genuine and one is adversarially manipulated image there. So that's the implications there. But like if you look at the traffic sign, you can be able to generate a fake sign for traffic sign, and that can cause catastrophic accident and many more. Next slide, please. Yeah, so digital identity systems that focus on robustness, part robustness can follow this kind of framework. When we have the original input image, that's bona fide is the real image, and we also have the spoof image, which is the manipulated image. Then we also have some pre-processing. So not only that, using this image to pass through the model and get some prediction output, we also need to see what will happen when we use some white box and black box attack against this input and passes to the model. And that's the identity proofing framework, where the level of the robustness will tell us whether we are going to accept this identity or we are going to reject this identity. It's based on the attack success rate and the accuracy of the predicting the attacks. Next slide, please. These are the common mitigation strategy for adversarial attacks. We have the adversarial training, where this involves data augmentations, where you just get many attacks and pass it to the model and do some kind of training. And that's what we call adversarial training. And we also have the defensive distillation. And we also have this kind two models. One model is the teacher, and also one model is the student. We also have ensemble method, where we try to match multiple models and query this model to make them strong against attack. We also have quantization, where we compress the model to make it smaller, and we also have some pruning. So all these kind of techniques, they have their own advantage as some limitations. Some of them are computationally expensive. If you take adversarial training, because you focus more on the adversarial sample and you are doing some data augmentation with the adversarial sample, then you may lose killing accuracy of the original sample. And also, this also is computationally expensive because it involves two models. You have the student model and you also have the teacher model. And the quantizations also, when you compress a model, you can be able to lose accuracy as well. Next slide, please. So what we just found as solutions is online hard example mining. This is a technique used in training AI model. And what the technique does is trying to pause the model to learn some difficult example, and that will also improve robustness. So we have used this technique. We have a model, then we integrate this technique into our model, and it's happened during the training. When you are just doing the training, you're trying to pause the model to learn harder examples that are difficult to detect. So if the model understands those kind of examples, if someone trying to launch an adversarial sample, the model can still perform better. So this gives the model some level of resilience. And one good thing with this technique, it doesn't require any adversarial training. When you see adversarial training, you still need to get the adversarial sample before you perform the training. This is just happening in the loss function. And when you just go some batches, the model can be able to learn more. Next slide, please. So this is an ongoing research, and we have just done some investigation, user CNN Resonance 50 CNN model, and also we also have done transformer model. We start with simple architecture, and we also go with complex architecture and see how these two architectures can help us. We start with simple data set, which is the Cassia face anti-spoofing data set. This is a commonly used benchmark data set for face biometric. It has 1,200 attacked images and 455 real images. We evaluate this model for presentation attack and see how does it perform. And also at the same time, when we try to generate some adversarial attack, how does it behave? We generate adversarial sample using the pass gradient sand method with this level of perturbation. This is a commonly used in literature. And we also perform shadow attack, which is also a black box attack, but we lower the optimization step. Next slide, please. Yeah, if you look at this result, this is the result for presentation attack performance of Resonate and vision transform model. One important metric is the AUC and the APCER and BPCER. This metric, the AUC need to be higher, and the APCER, BPCER, and ACCER need to be lower. So if you look at this model here, we do some fine tuning. If you see FT here is the pull-to model without any fine tuning. We also do some selective layer fine tuning and linear proving to reduce the number of parameters and to make the model a little bit slower. So if you look at the AUC here, you can see the first model have 99.99 AUC value, and with also 0.0 attack presentation classification error, which is a little bit acceptable. So, but even this model, someone can say this is a very good model for presentation attack detection, especially looking at the AUC and the APCER value. And also we did the same thing with the vision transformer model, which also shows a significant performance, especially the full-to model, where we have even the BPCR very low, 4.76, and the ACER also very low. But I will show you this kind of model when we try to generate adversarial sample. How does it behave? A model that gives you 99.99 AUC value. How does it behave in the presence of adversarial sample? Next slide. So this is the robustness evaluation here. If you look at here, we have the pass gradient sand method attack, and also we have the shadow attack. And this Resonate 50 full-to model is the one that gives us 99.99 AUC value. So when we try to launch adversarial attack, the accuracy goes down to 50, to 50.15. So this shows the implication of this adversarial attack there. So what the attacker are trying to do is launch the attack, test the system. Can the system be broken? Can the system resist? Can the model be useless? Something like that. So if you look at also in the vision transfer model, pull-to model, which also have 99.9% AUC, this adversarial attack take the AUC value to 17.43 here, which make it a very, very less robust model. So, but one thing you can just look here, when we integrate the technique we just proposed, especially online had example mine, it improved the vision transformer accuracy from 17.43 to 47.82, which is a significant improvement here. And also, if you look at the resonant model as well, it improved the linear probing performance here from 65.71 to 66.55. But in the where it's performed much better is in the presence of shadow attack there, where the vision transformer model gives us about 96.75 AUC even in the presence of the adversarial sample. So this is an ongoing work, and we are trying to test as many attacks as possible to cover all the attack space, and also test some other data set and see how our technique can scale through. Next slide. So the key takeaway from this presentation is we have shown that using pairs biometric systems without testing robustness can be catastrophic or can be an issue, because like we have seen that attackers can generate an image which look like a real image to bypass the performance of the system, making the accuracy of the systems very low, and also that can give them chance to get into the system. And we have shown that like there is a way to improve the robustness of a model without taking some techniques that are more computationally expensive or drop accuracy and many more. So with this online had example mining at the moment show us some improved performance against attack, especially with the vision transform model. And these are the initial results that I have already mentioned. We are still, this is a work in progress. We are still working toward making it much better, because like especially with the scaling issue, how does it scale in the presence of various adversarial attacks, and also like how does it scale in the presence of adversarial attack, and also in the presence of the data set that have many number of samples. Next slide. So this is the limitation I have already covered. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Idris. So obviously, being a National Institute for Data Science and AI, the Alan Turing, we undertake a significant amount of research. And what you can see here is the evidence base. What we try to do is make sure that it isn't just opinion, but there's evidence for the actions that we want you to take, so that we can really help you go from that very high level, which is important to ministers, etc., but go down to that technical level, so that those people who are charged with enabling the security and resilience of systems is easy to do. And the importance of standards in that, especially William was touching on that, is important. We can now move to the final session, which is going to be led by a colleague of mine, Professor John Crowcroft. He's the Marconi Chair at the University of Cambridge, and also a fellow of the Alan Turing Institute. So, John, if you want to come over, I'll hand the reins over to you. One thing I should say as John's coming up, thank you to the person in the audience who told me that the QR code wasn't working. So at the moment, that's not working. I'm not sure why. But what I would like to say is that email address of TDI, that stands for Trustworthy Digital Infrastructure, so tdi@turing.ac.uk. Please just reach out to us on that instead. John, here's the microphone. Thank you.
Hi. Right, thank you, Carsten. Okay, so we have a panel session. I'm getting very weird dropout on the headset, and I think it must be the headset, not the mic. Okay, so we have a panel session. Can I ask the three speakers up to the chairs up here? So the three speakers we have in this panel, Carsten, you've seen him already, so you know what he looks like. And we have Lena and Sebastian, and we represent a very broad section across the world. So I'll let the panel speakers introduce themselves, but just briefly, we cover England, Germany, Kenya, Rwanda, and France and Switzerland. So having had a conversation with people about where they're from, I'm English, so I'm very English. I don't have anything else. So, we are going to be talking about securing trust across the ecosystem. So one of the interesting evolutions in the work we've done on digital identity, we start working on trustworthiness of digital identity, and then we have trustworthiness of digital public infrastructure. And one of the infrastructures I think that should be more trustworthy is Wi-Fi here, in the sense of resilience would be good. And also the wireless microphone system. It would be great if that was more resilient, right? So these are, and they're sharing spectrum, by the way, if you know about how these work. So that's one of the problems. There's kind of complexity here. So complexity is the magic word, because this session and many people this week in ID for Africa have talked about the digital public ecosystem. So we went from the infrastructure to the wider picture. And of course, the ecosystem is that there are many stakeholders that have maybe not necessarily aligned interests. And as soon as you go between different identity systems across border, or even within a single sovereign nation, between different bits of your government, then the complexity becomes scary, and complexity is a very difficult thing to manage. The UK is one of the very few countries in the world which doesn't have a national identity. You may not know that, but it's almost unique. We have no single national identity system. One reason is the UK government has 30,000 separate digital identity systems in different services. They have digital ID for vets just so they can identify themselves for fixing avian flu. And they have a different system for vets to prove they can look after your pet cat. So there's just an example of a crazy system of complexity. And of course, those legacy systems are horribly difficult to fix. In greenfield deployments, if you're building a brand new system, it's quite a lot easier. You can deal with complexity. We heard about the Estonian system earlier. Estonia is often held up as an exemplar of a digital citizenship system. But actually, the population of Estonia is roughly 1 million people, right? I mean, Ajibon is much bigger population. The National Health Service in the UK has more employees than the population of Estonia. So it was quite an easy system they built from scratch. They are also quite a wealthy country relatively, but it's a very cool system. So complexity is the sort of enemy of trustworthiness, because it's hard to know where things are going wrong and how to add resilience, where to deal with things that are not working as you expect, which is often what undermines trust, is unexpected things happening. The thing doesn't work the way you would like it to work, or even just expect, because then, you know, what your expectations are, you're astonished, and this is not good. And it can be actually bad. Often it's just surprising. So this complexity is part of the problem. Resilience also is expensive. Resilience, I'm going to just give a couple of examples. In Spain recently, they lost the entire power grid for a day. So there was no networking. So nobody could buy anything digitally. Nobody could prove their identity digitally. Amazingly, in a day of entire power outage with no power and no communications, there were only 6 deaths. That's a very amazingly low number. I have no idea why it was not much worse. Okay, so that was interesting. So, and just going to another level of resilience, Estonia has a digital backup of the entire digital citizenship system, and it's stored in embassies, Estonian embassies, in different countries. The reason is they think they might be invaded by a neighboring enemy country, and they want to be able to turn off the entire system, and then when they get their country back, they can restore their ID systems and so on. A very similar thing happened after the country was partly invaded in Ukraine. The Ukrainians backed up their entire digital government systems, but they were not able to do the embassy trick because they had to do it super fast after the event rather than planned. And Ukrainian digital systems are backed up onto AWS. which is not ideal, but of course the lack of sovereignty, because obviously Ukraine doesn't own Amazon, but that's not a disaster because they're friendly. So dependence on a friendly state is not necessarily a problem. And this is to get to the point about resilience and ecosystems and sovereignty. Sovereignty does not necessarily require you to own every single piece of value supply chain stack. It may be okay to have mutual agreement with people. For example, you could back up your digital citizenship system to your neighboring country and they back up theirs to you. And if you do that with enough partners, then you have mutual assurance. But that doesn't require you to have 100% trust. The trust is embodied by the numbers. You get safety in numbers. Anyway, that's enough from me. I wanted to go to our three speakers. You've already heard Carsten speak, but he is going to go first, and he's going to be talking about this. How do we secure trust across systems? He's going to be talking from the point of view of the platform, and then we're going to hear from Lena about the actual overall ecosystem, her experiences of actually Scilab work in CMU Africa, and then we hear from Sebastian, where we're going to we're sort of going down the stack, as it were, down to more detailed technology, and we're going to hear about the biometrics, and then we'll go back around after that. We may be able to take questions on Slido. I'm not sure, but if you can get on the net and you can get to Slido, I can get the questions here. But anyway, first of all, we're just going to hear from our three panelists, and then I'll shut up now.
Thank you very much, John. Okay, so yeah, I don't need to introduce myself, but what I do want to talk about is, John, you mentioned about platforms, and one thing is we've heard, for those who've been at ID for Africa for many years, the microphone is in a bit of a dead spot. For those who've been at ID for Africa for a number of years, we'll see that we've moved from digital identity to digital public infrastructure, and now we're talking more about the digital public infrastructure ecosystem. But if I talk about that platform, you may have already heard of the Digital Public Goods Alliance and their DPI cake. One thing that's interesting is, as we move across that cake without going wider into the whole ecosystem, what we've got is trust issues as we pass system boundaries. So you saw the presentation, the video before from my colleague. So I hope you can all speak English because the microphone isn't working, so hopefully you can hear me. Trust is important across the boundary. And the thing that Mirko showed before was where you were going across borders. But that kind of boundary exists within a digital public infrastructure platform. And this is something that really is important to say, how do I get trust across a boundary, be it a border or be it within your own digital public infrastructure? Because what we have is different routes and different levels of trust. Sorry, Mishka, I don't know what you're telling me to do. There's nothing I can do. Sorry. I think what we have to do is consider trust framework. So, John, you mentioned that we do not have in the UK. Do you want? I'll try that one. Okay. That one was working occasionally, but not all the time. This one is working now. Thank you. Okay, hopefully we can have some signal. No, it's gone again. Okay. Okay, thank you. Where are we? So trust framework. So John, you mentioned we don't have a national identity system in the UK.
Hello.
But what we do have is trust frameworks, and those trust frameworks also exist in other countries. So Canada has a trust framework, New Zealand, and so does Australia. Now, these trust frameworks have different levels of trust depending on what you need to do and who needs to rely on it. And I think that's really important if we want to have these trust systems. Our own work that you saw in Mirko's presentation was around interoperability, so something called SAFI.
Hello.
So we will
Hello.
be releasing a new report rather soon on standards aware interoperability maturity. So please do look out for that. One of the principles that William talked about before was zero trust architectures. And zero trust architectures have been a great thing, been around for about 14 years now. But zero trust architectures are dynamic in a sense. What they say is don't trust somebody, but check the latest policy, check the environment that you're in, and then ask for the level of trust that is needed to access a service. And that is sometimes why you will get a continuous authentication request, for example. So this idea of being dynamic and reflecting the changing environment is really important. And talking of change, there's one final change I'd like to talk about. Could I ask, if you can hear me, how many people here are involved in national identity systems? National identity systems, so from a government perspective. So quite a lot of people. So could you keep your hands up a moment? I'd just like to ask, how many of you are aware of a post-quantum cryptography strategy for your nation? Are you aware of post-quantum cryptography strategies? And do you have a working plan for that? Not many have. And that's one of the things that's dynamic, right? So what we need to be able to do is change with the changing threat landscape. As quantum computing becomes available, maybe not in your country, but in the nation, where nation states might attack your systems, we need to be ready and start planning for that. So I think trust needs to be considered across a moving boundary and changing environment. Thank you.
All right, checking that you can hear me. Thank you all for making to this presentation. So my name is Lena Chacha, and I currently serve at Upanzi Network, which is part of Carnegie Mellon University, the Africa location, which sits at Rwanda. I serve as a technical lab manager and lead researcher, and also notably a winner of the Kim Cameron Award for contribution on intersection of cybersecurity and digital identity. So the Upanzi Network is a $4 million funded research lab that is currently working on various aspects of identity, including cybersecurity monitoring, biometric bias, finance, and debt exchange. So I've been asked to briefly introduce our work around secure service delivery and ecosystem integration. And what I really wanted to highlight today is that we have the technology. Carsten here asked about how many of you are aware of post-quantum computing and the deadline that we have for that, which is 2030, right? And other regions have sooner deadlines. So when it comes to secure service delivery and ecosystem integration, I think we are all aware that the threats come from somewhere else. We had in this conference today about conversation of we are moving digital. We want digital credential. The question that I always ask people is, if you look at historically, when we were hit by COVID-19, we invented all kinds of solutions to address the immediate problem. There's also a very famous saying that says, in crisis, we are very, very innovative. So when we are looking at digital credentials and digital identity and rolling that out, what problem are we trying to address exactly? So what I have here is work that we did last year, and I would like to call it the digital credentials maturity levels. So today, whether you're looking at a wallet, whether you have digital credentials or where you have a card, we have some form of digital credentials, and that is through our through an act that says that, you know, if someone presents a digital credential, that presents a photocopy of an ID, then it can be it's acceptable in some situations. That is some form of digital. So at the bottom left, we have photocopies of digital credentials. And then if you move a level up, we're talking about a digital copy of a credential, which is an image, and can be accessed via an API. So I've had a lot of countries saying that, if you look at our population and you look at the devices that are in the population, then we are looking at a USSD-based digital credential. So this is a place where, I think Alan Turing did some work before, where they were talking about storing a credential on a QR code. That is a form of digital credential. But the question I have for us is, how many of you go around, when you see a QR code, you just take up your phone and scan that? Show of hands. We're in the habit of scanning QR codes, right? And we're supposed to, we're supposed to trust that. How do you know what you're scanning, right? So that is where that kind of threat can come in there. If we'll move a level up, we're talking about a digital copy of a credential and image stored in a wallet. I think most countries that are talking about digital credentials and wallets, this is where they are right now. That I have an API that is provided by the National Identity Authority, and I will connect and download a credential. So it's some data format, maybe a JSON file, and then you store that on a wallet, and you're able to present that as a picture format. That is a form of digital credential, and that is where most countries are, and that's where we have to start ultimately. The next step, and so what I'm getting at this is that as you're thinking about your maturity levels, you want to think about what threats am I likely to face. Like, for example, if we go the step lower where you're talking about an image of a credential, how assure you that that is the actual credential that you are collecting? So those are some of the threat modeling that we're supposed to do. The next step is a wallet, a digital credential in formats like, acceptable international formats like a JOT, and then an image display. The next is, so the image display is something I think we saw in India with DigiLock, Sanjit. But there's one layer that is missing in that that ecosystem. And that is what the next one tries to address, which is a verifying app. So when you deploy an application that has your driving license, I have my driving license, and I am stopped and I'm asked to present a driving license. How sure are you that that application is actually given by the right authority? I mean, I can think of a million reasons how wallets will pop up in the ecosystem claiming to have legitimate driving licenses, legitimate passports, legitimate credentials. So then the next step is now where it's verifiable credentials and shareable. And the most, I think the most advanced one that I haven't seen yet is the question of, you have a wallet, it has an acceptable, shareable, standard, shareable format, and then it also addresses selective disclosure. Now, the threat here is when you're talking about the selective disclosure, I, as the user who has walked into a bank and I'm being asked for some details, believe me, if they ask me for ID of my grandfather, I will provide it. Because at that point, I need the service, right? So this is another thing, is like, do we need registries? Do we need schemas for certain regions to make sure that in the perspective of our data protection and privacy policies, there is minimal disclosure of information? So when we did this work, actually this is work that we did by looking at all the 14,000 phones that have ever been produced. And what we observed is that, phones that have the right hardware to accommodate these credentials are not necessarily very affordable and available in the population. So the advisory here that we give in a report is that the higher you go in this step that you can see on the screen right now, is that the device that is likely to accommodate this is very expensive and therefore not accessible. And most people will be on the lower side, and you want to do some threat modeling around that. I'll give you a crazy story that I actually had in another forum. When you talk about threat modeling, I think one behavior that I've seen is that we do threat modeling, but we never think about the credential holder as the threat to the system, right? That if I have put a credential on the phone, you assume that I'm not interested in cheating the system, that I will actually present the right credential. The second thing that I wanted to talk about is PKI systems and PKI systems and the question of keys. So when we talk about digital credentials and how we are rolling that out, whether in a card that has a chip or a wallet, I think there's a very huge reliance on cryptography there. So what secures cryptographic systems? One is the length of the key. The second one is how we store the key. But the particular threat, this is actually work that I did with another group, and one of the things we observed is that as we're thinking about PKI systems and blockchain, one glaring gap that came out of that discussion is we are not thinking about, so every time we think about cybersecurity, we're thinking about the CIA, that is confidentiality, integrity, and availability. There's one thing that we are all missing in this room, and that is sustainability. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that when you issue a credential and you've signed it with a cryptographic key pair, what happens when you refresh those keys? Do you invalidate the credential? Do you reissue? What do? You have a population of 1 billion, India. Do you reissue those credentials? What does that do to the straining of the system and availability? The second part is the worst, actually. So you generate a key pair today, and you are compromised tomorrow. Or you've been using this key, maybe your cryptographic period is 2 years, and you are compromised after 1 year. And what happens to all the, they steal your private key. What happens to all the credentials that you've been issuing for the last 1 year? Do you call everyone and reissue? So those are some of the things that we realized that were not being considered, and I'm available after this panel, and we can have conversations around that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So, I'm Sébastien Marcel. So I'm working from in an exotic place. Let's call it like this. I'm working for a small AI research institute in Switzerland, where I'm leading a research group on biometrics, security, and privacy, and I'm going to discuss a little bit of that today. I'm also affiliated as a professor to the School of Criminal Justice at the University of Lausanne. So as part of our institute, we are essentially working, using, and developing AI technologies. And I'm going to bring the discussion now on a different, let's say, angle, right? Which is, what does AI has to do with it? Well, it has to do, unfortunately, to do with many aspects of the big picture, and I'm just going to address very few, actually, and probably if we do a next round, more is going to come. But before I jump into it, I like to go back to the biometrics, and maybe it's not very clear to most of the audience, but what has AI to do with biometrics? So we need to understand essentially how biometrics works nowadays. So 10, 15 years ago it was a bit different, but now it has changed quite a lot. So nowadays, when you do, let's say, face recognition, your face image is transformed with an AI system which has been trained on a lot of images, and your face is transformed into a new representation. And what is interesting is that I've been working in this face recognition technologies for now more than 25 years, and I've been working on presentation attack detection now for almost the same time. So we started working on this in 2009 with the first databases. Actually, I will point you, I will put Idris in touch with with a couple of databases he should use, and not Casia, for many reasons. And then what we observed, and this is going to be an interesting story or anecdote kind of thing. We've been working on presentation attack detection and also presentation attack for short. So basically trying to break systems. When you want to try to bypass a face recognition system, a biometric system, essentially you are forging attacks and you are presenting them to the sensor to see if you can impersonate someone. Looks very simple, looks actually quite funny. Actually, it's a lot of fun. And you measure simply the vulnerability by counting how many times you can bypass the system. And before, let's say, 2015, we were quite successful in doing it. And something happened in 2015 is that there have been a shift, a breakthrough in the way, basically with deep learning, in the way we were doing face recognition. So this is where we started to use those deep artificial neural networks to do the face recognition processing. And something very funny happened at that time. First, it was not the funny part, but the first observation is that, of course, the accuracy went down, went up. Sorry, the error rates went down. So it was those systems have been demonstrated to be very accurate at recognizing faces, and this is why they are deployed widely nowadays. But the funny part is that what we observed is that from the day we started to use these technologies, when we started to use to do presentation attacks, so basically to measure the vulnerability of those systems to presentation attacks, well, intuitively you would say, wow, those systems which are very accurate at recognizing faces, they should be very robust too at recognizing attacks. Well, actually, this is wrong. They are more vulnerable to presentation attacks. Well, I've been able to demonstrate experimentally on databases that that those AI systems are more vulnerable. So there are many reasons why this is true, and I don't have time to elaborate on this, but I will be happy to share with it afterwards if you're interested. But it just shows that when you choose to you change from the technology and you move to another one, that you have also to consider evaluating vulnerabilities continuously, right? So this is the link with also the attacks. So rethinking the attacks. This is where, and I follow here the previous presentation we had on the detection side. You need to think that you have yet another module that detects attacks, which may be also AI driven, that also use AI to detect the attacks. That should basically exist in the same ecosystem again. Although this year we're more talking about the let's say the software ecosystem itself, where you have systems that can recognize the identity, but you have also a system that can recognize whether the object is, let's say, a real person, a bona fide, or an attack. And the question is, how do you combine those two systems together? Since we are still on the AI angle, there is something else I'd like to jump in. Was another side effect of moving to AI-based technologies to do face recognition or biometrics. This is a problem of fairness. Something that has been observed is that those systems, which seems to be very accurate, and they are, actually were not accurate for everyone. So if we are looking more closely at the specific demographic groups, based on origin or maybe even gender or age, we have been able to observe that there are discrepancies in terms of accuracy. Basically, the accuracy is much better for some groups than others. And in the end, it makes also very much sense because it depends on what data set has been used to train those AI systems. So if you are in Europe, let's say, most of the data sets have Caucasian people, and then in Asia, the systems that have been trained there may contain essentially more images from people from Asia or Pacific region. So therefore, the demographics which are not included, which are not statistically represented in the training set, will be less likely to be recognized with the same error rates, with the same accuracy, level of accuracy, and the error rates will be higher for some demographics than others. This type of fairness can be assessed now. We know that we have been observing that there is a tendency for this fairness to reduce, but it's still present and it's still something that should be kept in mind, that this fairness needs to be assessed before buying a technology, for instance. And there are solutions, for instance, to do the mitigation, to use synthetic data to mitigate systems after they've been trained. And it comes to the last point, if I still have 1 minute. So all of this I've been talking about involves one fundamental thing, which is testing. Testing. At the end, one of the topic of the session is trust, right? So what does it mean, trust? What kind of trust are we talking about? My perspective and my interest is that we want to trust the technology. So who wants to trust the technology? The citizens first, because they need to trust the infrastructure, they need to trust that the technology is working, right? So and also the service providers, the governments or the companies which are going to buy another technology to from another provider. So how do you trust that what you are buying is actually accurate, not biased, robust to attacks, all these kind of things? Are you going to trust the company selling you this technology, which is promising? I mean, you go to the exhibition and they're all promising that they are the best, obviously, and they are for sure very good, obviously. But how do you make sure that it is really the best choice for your service or for your use case, right? And this is where I think certification is highly important, because you need, at the end of the day, if you don't have the capability to test yourself, you need to rely on independent third parties that can test the technology according to their accuracy to recognize persons, according to their robustness to detect attacks, and they're also if they are biased or not. Thank you.
Thanks so much. We have some pretty good questions here, so I think I just want to ask myself one question. I'm asking myself, which is, one of the very hot topics in the use of AI is vibe coding. But there are two issues here. While it may reduce the cost of running your DPI stack, because you don't have to hire expensive programmers, one, you don't know what price Anthropic are going to charge you for using Claude next year, or Copilot. So you've just bought lock-in for your toolchain. But two, you actually have no idea what the code does, really. So this is a version of what happens when you replace your old-fashioned biometric system with a neural net-based system. And then you have to get into explainable neural nets, which is hard to understand what's actually going on. And now you have a worse problem, which is the actual software system written by AI for you has brought you into two worlds of pain. I think this is actually a major problem. But I don't want to, we probably don't have time to talk about that, but if people are interested in that, it's like a really big deal. And if you're into sovereign stack, there's no country outside the US or China that currently actually has a viable vibe coding system at scale. So, this is an interesting space. The questions we have, which I think I would like the panel to answer, there's one specific, can you read them there? Can you see the questions on the screen? Oh, okay. So there's a question for Carsten, actually. It's often very unclear how countries can engage with institutions like the Turing Solutions, like Distaff. So what channels are available for collaboration? I think that if you could just quickly say, well, we have public channels for that.
The more I use both, the more you get involved, it's gone again. The more you get involved, the more that you can have a voice to engage. So we are open for business, but it's about you taking that step. That's the important thing. You take that step. We will try to accommodate, insofar as we can, what the community needs. So easiest way, use that email.
Okay, there's a very nice question, I think, which is kind of out of scope for the panel, but they may have a go at answering that. While digital credentials are important, what's the right approach for inclusion, as many may not be included with digital credentials alone? And I guess this is talking to things like socially constructed identity, maybe, but if maybe, Elena, you have an answer to that.
Okay. So I think that's a good question. When we did this search, as I mentioned when I was making my brief, I said that when we looked at mobile phones, when you talk about digital credential, unfortunately, I am a victim myself. When I thought about digital credential for the first time, it's very
Okay, try this one, maybe.
When you talk about digital credential, the first place you go is mobile. But if you look at the maturity level that I presented, I think there are multiple ways of presenting your digital credential, including what, like for example, Ethiopia has adopted, they give you a card and you can print it on a paper, and you can even print a QR code as that digital credential. And there are many other formats of like QR codes right now that we are looking at that can accommodate much more data than just like much more data that you would typically require on an ID that you issue. So having said that, there are multiple levels to this. There is issue a card and print at the back of it a QR code that is self-sufficient and offline. That is a digital credential in itself. And as I said, when you're thinking about digital credentials, you're thinking about cryptography. That means you can verify the issuer on the spot with an online connection to the issuing authority, or you can verify it offline. So I hope I answered your question.
Okay, so I'm going to translate this just to show off. Pour les systèmes d'identification existants en Afrique, ne l'utilisent pas intelligence artificielle, comment faire face aux nouvelles formes d'attaque? So actually, this is a perfect question for Sebastian, because it's in French. Yeah, for systems of identity, well, not because of that, but because it's about AI attacks. And so if you haven't got AI, how do you work with AI-formed attacks? How do you understand them? And yeah. Oh, you can translate it again.
Right, so let me read it. I'm just trying to understand it on the spot. Donc, je répète la question. Donc, pour les systèmes d'identification existants en Afrique, n'utilisant pas d'IA, comment faire face aux nouvelles formes d'attaque? Alors, je pense que les systèmes d'identification qui existent en Afrique utilisent l'IA, mais vous ne savez pas. So, in English. So I think that nowadays, most, of, if not all, I mean, if your systems is more recent than, let's say, 10 years, it's very likely that it contains AI inside, but you just don't know it. That's it. So it's not because that you don't have your only GPU cluster and you don't do AI, that it doesn't mean that AI is not deployed. At the end of the day, when it is deployed, it's just a matter of inference, right? So the software and the hardware is able to run a neural network. So I hope it answered the question.
Yeah. I'd say even some language models, which are not what we're talking about here for some of this is more classical convolutional neural nets, but some language models can run on a £3,000 framework PC or an M5 laptop, so MacBook, whatever. So that's expensive for a laptop, but it's not unavailable to nation states. So for this kind of problem, I don't think it's unaffordable if you want to explore this area at all. The last question I think we have time for is kind of interesting. There are actually lots of questions here that are interesting. So thank you very much for your question, but we only have 2 or 3 minutes more. I think the last question that we should address was about, what is the essential component? What's the essential component for a zero trust digital ecosystem? I think this is a Carsten question. So what's the minimum thing you need to make a zero trust system work?
Yeah, thanks. So as it implies, zero trust, the important thing is that you start from not trusting anything. So what you need to do really is you need a sort of policy engine. So you need some kind of signals that are going to tell you how to adjust that dynamic trust level. But what you also need is the components to make sure that once you consider how important action to a service is, you say, I don't trust anything on the network at the moment. And what I'm going to do is ask for enough credentials that I can trust you. So that doesn't mean like the verifiable credentials. That can be one element. But it's about maybe which country are you in? Or it could be what recent activity have you done? So having that sort of policy and that technology is the absolute basic. But so I'm now going to close the session. So let me just thank John for a wonderful moderating of that panel. Thank you for all getting involved and adding this. Wonderful panelists, Lena and Sebastian. I just would like to say one thing before I do. That question that was quite popular at the end about the distaff framework, that framework that you saw from Mirko's presentation What it did is it showed how a system is trustworthy. The important thing about the distaff is it is not for you to share with other countries. It's not for you to share with your public if you want. It is an open framework, but you test that for your own uses. The whole idea is you can use it continually and get knowledge yourself about where your strengths are and where your weaknesses are. So it may be that you decide you don't want to be completely transparent with your system. That's fine. So you can say, I'm happy with that, but you may say, I want to be a little bit more private with the system. Not only that you comply with your own legislation, but with others. So it's really important to see distaff as a self-assessment tool, not necessarily something that you are going to share with other countries. If you want to promote what you had in your self-assessment, fine, but use it for your own digital public infrastructure improvement. On that note, let me thank you all once again. I hope to speak to you all soon. Have a wonderful lunch and rest of the conference. Thank you.